What if the stories we've been telling for thousands of years aren't just entertainment, but something far more profound, something like a secret language, a code passed down through generations, designed not merely to entertain, but to protect? Imagine for a moment that myths are more than fireside tales. They're encrypted messages from our ancestors, carefully crafted warnings meant to guide us away from the pitfalls they themselves stumbled into. These narratives, passed from voice to voice, culture to culture, carry within them the weight of lived experience, the echo of disasters narrowly avoided, and the hard-won wisdom of those who came before us. They are time capsules of human understanding, waiting for us to listen closely enough to hear what they're truly saying. In this video, we're going to explore 26 of these powerful myths, each one transformed into a warning system for future generations. We'll travel across civilizations and epochs, from the ancient Greeks to Nordic legends, from Mesopotamian epics to indigenous oral traditions, uncovering how these stories serve as cautionary blueprints for humanity. Think about Pandora's box, a tale that warns us of the unintended consequences of unchecked curiosity, or Icarus, whose flight too close to the sun reminds us of the dangers of overambition and pride. These aren't just moral fables, they're strategic lessons encoded in narrative form, meant to help us navigate the complexities of human nature, the risks of societal collapse, and the principles of survival. By the end of our journey, you won't just see mythology as a collection of folklore. You'll recognize it as a vital toolkit for facing modern challenges, blending history, psychology, and ethics into a compelling guide for today's world. This exploration is about connecting the dots between ancient wisdom and contemporary life, understanding why these stories have endured, and how they can help us build a more thoughtful, resilient future. So let's begin by diving into why these myths matter now more than ever, setting the stage for a deep and revealing look at the hidden warnings they carry, and how learning to heed them might just change the way we see our past, our present, and the path ahead. But to truly grasp how these ancient stories function as warning systems, we first need to understand their very nature. Think of myths not as mere fiction, but as a form of cultural memory, a shared hard drive for an entire society, storing its most crucial data across centuries. Before written language, oral traditions were the primary way knowledge was preserved and passed down. Imagine elders gathered around a fire, not just telling a story about a great flood, but embedding within that narrative vital information about which valleys to avoid during the rainy season, or the signs of an impending disaster. The story's characters and drama make the information unforgettable, transforming a dry survival lesson into a gripping tale that every generation would want to retell. This is the genius of the mythic format. It packages complex, often terrifying, truths into symbols and narratives that are accessible, engaging, and incredibly durable. They are mnemonic devices on a civilizational scale. We see this pattern echoed across the globe, a striking testament to its power. Cultures with no possible contact with one another, from the Mesopotamian epic of Gilgamesh to the Hindu story of Manu, from the biblical Noah to the Aboriginal Dreamtime stories, all have their own version of a great flood myth. This isn't a coincidence, it's a collective memory. Many scholars suggest these stories likely originated from real, catastrophic flooding events at the end of the last ice age, events so traumatic and formative that the warning to never forget became woven into the very fabric of cultural identity. The myth isn't just about water, it's a symbolic package containing lessons about humility before nature, the importance of heeding warnings, and the resilience needed to start anew. It's a survival guide disguised as a legend. Beyond natural disasters, these stories also encode warnings about moral and societal collapse, A tale about a hero brought low by his own arrogance isn't just a character study. It's a cautionary blueprint for leaders, a warning that hubris can destroy not just an individual but an entire kingdom. By using symbolism, a box that should never be opened, wings that melt when flying too high, myths translate abstract, difficult concepts like ethics, ambition, and responsibility into concrete, visceral images that resonate on a deep, intuitive level. They shape our behaviors and instill values long before we ever encounter a formal philosophy text, ensuring that the core wisdom of a culture survives even when empires fall and written records turn to dust. This foundational role makes mythology one of humanity's most resilient and powerful technologies for preserving not just who we are, but who we should strive to be, and what we must avoid becoming at all costs. Now let's turn our attention to the first of these powerful warning systems, a story that has echoed through the ages as a stark reminder of a very human trait, the myth of Pandora's box. In the ancient Greek narrative, Pandora was the first woman, crafted by the gods and bestowed with many gifts, including a powerful, intoxicating curiosity. She was also given a large jar, often mistranslated as a box, with one strict instruction: never to open it. But as the story goes, that very human impulse, that burning need to know what was inside, proved too strong to resist. The moment she lifted the lid, she unleashed a torrent of miseries upon the world: sickness, death, envy, hatred, and all the other evils that plague humanity. She managed to slam the lid shut, trapping only one thing inside: hope. This myth is so much more than a simple fable about disobedience. It's a profound exploration of the dual nature of curiosity itself. On one hand, curiosity is the very engine of human progress. It's the force that drives us to explore new lands, to ask fundamental questions about the universe, and to invent technologies that transform our lives. Without it, we would stagnate, but Pandora's story specifically warns us about the other side of that coin: curiosity without caution, inquiry without ethics, and innovation without foresight. The jar wasn't just a container, it was a boundary, a line drawn by a wisdom greater than her own, and her action wasn't merely naughty. It was catastrophic because it was undertaken without any consideration for the potential consequences. We can see this pattern repeating itself throughout history and in our most modern dilemmas. The development of the atomic bomb, for instance, was a stunning scientific achievement born from intense curiosity about the nature of matter. Yet, its use unleashed a terrifying new era of existential threat, a literal Pandora's box of nuclear proliferation that the world is still struggling to manage. Today, we stand at similar precipices. The rapid advancement of artificial intelligence is fueled by our boundless curiosity to create intelligent machines, but it raises alarming questions about job displacement, algorithmic bias, and even the potential loss of human control over systems smarter than we are. In the field of genetic engineering, tools like CRISPR offer the incredible promise of curing hereditary diseases, but they also open the door to ethical nightmares like designer babies and unintended, irreversible changes to the human gene pool. What makes the Pandora myth so enduringly relevant is its nuanced conclusion. It's important to remember that hope remained inside the jar. This is a crucial part of the warning. It suggests that even when we make catastrophic errors in judgment, when our unchecked curiosity unleashes chaos, we are not left completely without recourse. Hope represents our capacity for resilience, our ability to mitigate damage, to learn from our mistakes, and to persevere in cleaning up the messes we create. The myth doesn't tell us to stop being curious. It instructs us to pair that curiosity with responsibility. It's a call for humility, for understanding that some knowledge comes with a heavy price, and that true wisdom lies in knowing when to proceed and how to safeguard the world from the forces we are about to unlock. If Pandora's story warns us about the perils of curiosity without caution, then the myth of Icarus offers a companion lesson on the seductive and often catastrophic danger of overconfidence. This ancient Greek tale centers on a father and son, Daedalus and Icarus, imprisoned in a labyrinth of their own making. The ingenious Daedalus crafts a daring escape plan. He fashions 2 pairs of wings from feathers and wax. Before their flight, he gives his son a crucial, life-saving piece of advice. Fly too low and the sea's damp spray will weigh down the wings. Fly too high and the sun's heat will melt the wax. The path to safety, he insists, is the middle course. Icarus, however, is intoxicated by the thrill of flight. He soars higher and higher, drunk on the feeling of power and freedom, ignoring his father's desperate cries. The sun's rays soften the wax, his wings disintegrate, and he plummets into the sea that now bears his name. This isn't merely a story about a boy who didn't listen to his dad. It is a profound archetype, a stark warning against hubris, that excessive pride and ambition which leads us to believe we are above the natural order. Icarus's fatal flaw wasn't a lack of skill or a faulty design. It was the arrogance that made him believe the rules did not apply to him. He ignored the fundamental limitations of his artificial wings, treating a calculated tool as a source of godlike power. The myth teaches us that every innovation, every ambition, exists within a system of constraints, physical, ethical, and natural. To defy them is not a sign of greatness, but a prelude to a fall. We see Icarus's shadow in some of the most pressing challenges of our time. Consider our relationship with the planet. For generations, human industry has operated on a premise of boundless growth, pushing economic and technological advancement with little regard for the ecological consequences. We've flown ever closer to the sun, burning fossil fuels and altering the atmosphere, assuming the Earth's systems could absorb the impact. Now we face the melting of our own wings, rising sea levels, extreme weather events, and biodiversity loss. The myth warns that the natural world has immutable laws, and our ambition, however impressive, must operate within them, not in defiance of them. This pattern of hubris repeats in the corporate world. History is littered with the wreckage of companies and empires that flew too high. Enron, driven by greed and a belief in its own infallibility, constructed elaborate financial deceptions until its entire structure collapsed. The 2008 financial crisis was a direct result of overambitious risk-taking in the housing market, where the belief that prices would only go up led to a catastrophic meltdown. In each case, a measured, humble approach, a middle course, was abandoned for the intoxicating promise of limitless reward. The true genius of the Icarus myth, however, lies not in its tragic ending but in the father's original warning. Daedalus did not say flying was bad. He celebrated human ingenuity and the power of invention to solve seemingly impossible problems. His instruction was about navigation, not prohibition. The lesson is not to never fly, but to understand the conditions of flight. It's a call for measured progress, for ambition tempered by wisdom and humility. It asks us to balance our drive to innovate with a deep respect for the boundaries that keep us safe, reminding us that the most sustainable and successful path is often the one in the middle, far from the dangerous extremes. Just as Icarus's fall was a solitary tragedy of ambition, the ancient story of the Tower of Babel presents a collective catastrophe, a warning of how societal unity can shatter not from an external threat, but from within. According to the Book of Genesis, in a time when all of humanity spoke a single language, people gathered on the plains of Shinar and decided to build a city with a tower so immense its top would reach the heavens. Their stated goal was to make a name for themselves and to avoid being scattered across the earth. But this project was born not from collaboration for the common good, but from a place of collective pride and defiance. Seeing their ambition, a concerned higher power concluded that with one language and a unified purpose, however misguided, nothing would be out of their reach. The divine response was not to destroy the tower, but to introduce a profound confusion, a babel of different languages. Suddenly, co-workers could no longer understand each other. The construction ground to an immediate halt, and the people, unable to communicate or cooperate, scattered across the globe, their grand project abandoned and left as a monument to fractured ambition. This myth is a powerful allegory for the invisible architecture that holds societies together: shared understanding and clear communication. The tower itself is almost irrelevant. It's a MacGuffin. The real story is about the breakdown of the social contract. The punishment wasn't the introduction of different cultures, but the destruction of the common tool needed to bridge them. The warning is that without a shared language, both literally and figuratively, any collective endeavor, no matter how well-intentioned or brilliantly conceived, is doomed to collapse into chaos and fragmentation. It's a caution against the arrogance of believing that a common goal is enough without the deeper, more humble work of fostering mutual understanding and empathy among those striving for it. We need only look at our modern world to see the Tower of Babel being built and crumbling in real time. On a global scale, international collaborations on critical issues like climate change or pandemic response are often hamstrung by national self-interest, diplomatic misunderstandings, and a failure to find a truly common language of compromise. Each nation speaks the dialect of its own political and economic priorities, and the resulting cacophony can prevent meaningful action until it's too late. Closer to home, our digital public squares have become modern-day plains of Shinar. Social media platforms, which were ostensibly built to connect us, often amplify our differences, trapping us in algorithmic echo chambers where we no longer share a common factual language with those outside our tribe. We see the same words: freedom, justice, safety, but they have come to mean radically different things to different groups, leading to a profound and often hostile inability to find common ground or build anything together. Yet the myth's deepest lesson might be more subtle and more hopeful than it first appears. The confusion of languages was not intended to punish humanity with perpetual division, but to force a necessary humility and a different path forward. Scattering across the earth led to the beautiful diversity of cultures, each with its own unique wisdom and perspective. The warning, therefore, isn't against diversity itself, but against the pride that prevents us from valuing it. The modern challenge isn't to return to a single, monolithic language or culture. That would be impossible and undesirable. The challenge is to become skilled translators and empathetic listeners, to build new towers not of brick and mortar, but of shared values and patient dialogue. It's about learning to appreciate the different melodies of human experience while still finding the harmony within them, recognizing that our greatest projects can only succeed when we make the effort to truly understand one another. If the tragedy of Icarus was a fall from a physical height and the Tower of Babel a collapse of collective understanding, the myth of Cassandra introduces a different kind of agony, the psychological torment of being right and being utterly powerless to act on it. In the rich tapestry of Greek mythology, Cassandra, the daughter of King Priam of Troy, was blessed with the gift of prophecy by the god Apollo. But when she spurned his advances, he could not revoke his divine gift. Instead, he twisted it, cursing her so that while her predictions would always be perfectly accurate, no one who heard them would ever believe a word she said. She was condemned to a special kind of hell, to see the future with crystal clarity, and to be dismissed as a madwoman for trying to share it. Her story reaches its devastating climax during the Trojan War. As the Greeks leave their now famous wooden horse outside the city gates, a triumphant and weary Troy sees it as a trophy, a symbol of their victory and the end of a decade-long siege. But Cassandra alone recognizes it for what it truly is, a trick, a tomb on wheels filled with enemy soldiers. She runs through the streets, screaming her warnings, her voice raw with a terror that is entirely rational. But her people, including her own family, do not hear a prophet. They hear the ravings of a hysteric, a woman driven insane by the horrors of war. They dismiss her, drag her away, and celebrate their impending doom. The gates are thrown open, the horse is brought inside, and that very night Troy falls in flames and blood, exactly as she foretold. Her curse was not just a personal affliction, it became a national catastrophe. This ancient story is one of the most enduring and painfully relevant warning systems we have because it diagnoses a flaw not in the messenger, but in the audience. The problem is never the accuracy of the warning. It is our collective willingness, or rather our profound unwillingness, to hear it. Cassandra represents any expert, any scientist, any whistleblower, or any marginalized voice that presents inconvenient, uncomfortable, or costly truths to a society that is simply not ready to listen. The curse is not a supernatural phenomenon. It is a metaphor for the human tendency to shoot the messenger, to prioritize comforting lies over disturbing facts, and to allow pride and short-term thinking to override evidence and reason. We are surrounded by modern Cassandras, their voices echoing her desperate cries. For decades, climate scientists have meticulously built an irrefutable case for the planetary emergency of global warming, presenting data on rising temperatures, melting ice caps, and intensifying storms. Yet for years, their warnings were met with dismissal, political obstruction, and public apathy, their credibility attacked by interests invested in the status quo. In the realm of public health, epidemiologists have long warned of the inevitability of a global pandemic, outlining the critical need for robust early warning systems and stockpiled medical supplies. These reports were often shelved, deemed too alarmist or too expensive to act upon, until the arrival of COVID-19 made their predictions a devastating reality. And in our social spheres, activists and community leaders from marginalized groups have consistently sounded the alarm on systemic injustices, only to be ignored or silenced by those in power who are insulated from those very problems. The profound lesson of Cassandra's myth is that it forces us to ask a difficult question not of the prophet but of ourselves. Who are we ignoring today? It warns us against the arrogance of assuming that our current understanding is complete and that dissenting or alarming voices are automatically wrong. The curse can be broken, but only through a conscious act of intellectual humility. It requires us to cultivate a society that values evidence over ideology, that listens to those with first-hand experience, and that has the courage to confront uncomfortable truths head-on, especially when they demand difficult change. Heeding the Cassandra is not about blind faith. It's about having the wisdom to recognize that sometimes the most important truth is the one we least want to hear. Where Cassandra's tragedy was one of being ignored, King Midas's is one of being granted exactly what he thought he wanted, only to discover it was a prison of his own making. This classic Greek myth tells of a king who, for a favor rendered, is offered a wish by the god Dionysus. Overjoyed, Midas asks that everything he touches turn to gold. His wish is granted, and at first it seems like the ultimate fantasy. He reaches out to a branch, it becomes a gleaming, precious metal statue. He picks up a stone, it transforms into a solid gold nugget. He is ecstatic, envisioning a life of limitless power and wealth, but the euphoria is brutally short-lived. He sits down to a feast, hungry from his efforts, and reaches for a piece of bread. The moment his fingers make contact, it hardens into inedible metal. He raises a goblet of wine to his parched lips, and the liquid solidifies into a golden slab. Even worse, in his joy, he goes to embrace his beloved daughter, and in a moment of horrific realization, he turns her into a lifeless, golden statue. His gift has become a curse, severing him from the most fundamental sources of life and love: food, drink, and human connection. This story is one of the most straightforward yet profound warnings in all of mythology. It is a powerful allegory for the spiritual and emotional poverty that can accompany the single-minded pursuit of material wealth. Midas's golden touch is a metaphor for a value system that reduces the entire world to its monetary worth, a perspective that is ultimately dehumanizing. The things he touches don't become more valuable, they become useless. The bread loses its nourishment, the wine its refreshment, and his daughter her life. The myth argues that true value isn't assigned by a price tag. It is inherent in an object's purpose, its function, and its role in our lived experience. A meal is valuable because it sustains us, a drink because it quenches our thirst, and a loved one because of the relationship we share. By transmuting everything into the same cold, uniform metal, Midas doesn't enrich his world. He strips it of all its diverse, beautiful, and essential meaning. We don't have to look far to see King Midas's story playing out in our modern, consumer-driven societies. The relentless pursuit of economic growth and personal wealth, often treated as the highest goal, can lead to a similar kind of spiritual emptiness. The phenomenon of affluenza, a state of chronic dissatisfaction and anxiety despite material abundance, is a direct parallel. We see individuals working 80-hour weeks to afford luxury cars and larger homes, only to find they have no time to enjoy them or the relationships that make a house a home. Their lives, in a sense, become golden statues, impressive to look at from the outside, but cold, static, and ultimately hollow within. The pursuit of more stuff often comes at the direct expense of the things that actually generate well-being: quality time with family, engaging hobbies, community involvement, and personal rest. Furthermore, Midas's curse extends beyond the individual to the very planet we inhabit. Our modern economic system, built on extraction and consumption, is effectively turning vast swaths of the natural world into gold for quarterly reports, while rendering it lifeless and inert for future generations. Lush, biodiverse rainforests are touched by the demand for palm oil and cattle ranching, turning into monoculture deserts. Vibrant coral reefs, bleached and killed by warming oceans acidified by our emissions, become barren underwater graveyards. We are, in a very real sense, repeating Midas's folly on a global scale, prioritizing short-term financial gain over the long-term health of the ecosystems that provide our actual sustenance and wonder. The redemption in Midas's story, often overlooked, is that he eventually learns his lesson. He begs Dionysus to take the gift back, and he is instructed to wash in the river Pactolus, whose sands thereafter were said to be filled with gold. This part of the myth is crucial. It doesn't suggest that wealth is inherently evil, but that it must be kept in its proper place. The gold ends up in the river, a natural resource rather than in his hands, a personal obsession. The warning is against making accumulation the central goal of one's life. It is a call to value what is truly precious: our health, our relationships, our connection to a living world, and to understand that money is a tool to enhance those things, not a substitute for them. Midas's regret teaches us that a life measured only in gold is a life that has tragically missed the point, a caution that perfectly sets the stage for the next myth, which explores the very nature of a life spent in futile labor. After witnessing the spiritual emptiness of King Midas, we encounter a punishment that strikes at the very core of human dignity, not a curse of too much meaning, but a sentence of absolutely none. In Greek mythology, Sisyphus, the cunning king of Corinth, was notorious for his deceit. He cheated death not once, but twice, using his cleverness to trap Thanatos, the god of death himself, and then later tricking Persephone into allowing him to return to the world of the living. For his audacity and his belief that he could outsmart the fundamental order of the universe, the gods devised a punishment that was uniquely cruel in its psychological torment. He was condemned to spend eternity in the underworld rolling an enormous boulder up a steep mountain. Yet, every time he neared the summit, his strength would fail, and the massive rock would tumble all the way back down to the plain below. His task was not just difficult or painful, it was utterly, completely, and eternally futile. There was no finish line, no moment of achievement, no lasting progress, only the endless, grinding cycle of effort without any result. This myth is a profound exploration of a very specific kind of suffering that goes beyond physical exhaustion. It's the agony of meaningless labor, the soul-crushing despair of work that offers no autonomy, no creativity, and no sense of purpose or completion. Sisyphus's punishment wasn't just hard work, it was work stripped of all its dignifying qualities. In the ancient world, a farmer's labor was difficult, but it resulted in a harvest. A craftsperson's toil was intense, but it created a beautiful object. Sisyphus's labor produces nothing. It is action without impact, effort without artifact, struggle without story. He is the ultimate cog in a machine that makes nothing, a symbol of pure existential emptiness. We don't have to look to the underworld to find modern versions of Sisyphus's hill. His struggle echoes in the repetitive, monotonous tasks that define many jobs within industrialized and now digitalized economies. Think of the assembly line worker performing the same precise motion thousands of times a day, their personal agency completely subsumed by the relentless pace of the conveyor belt. Or consider the data entry clerk, trapped in a sea of spreadsheets, their unique human potential reduced to transferring information from one digital box to another with no understanding of the larger picture or purpose. Even in the white-collar world, the Sisyphean dynamic appears in endless cycles of corporate restructuring, where employees pour their energy into new initiatives only to see them abandoned months later when leadership changes direction, rendering all their work effectively a boulder that has rolled back down the hill. These roles often offer a paycheck, but they can systematically drain the human spirit by denying the basic psychological need for mastery, autonomy, and most importantly, a sense that one's efforts matter. The true power of the myth, however, and its ultimate warning, was best articulated by the 20th century philosopher Albert Camus. In his famous essay, The Myth of Sisyphus, Camus doesn't just see Sisyphus as a pitiful figure. He argues that we must imagine Sisyphus happy. This isn't a statement of absurd cruelty, but one of profound rebellion. Camus suggests that the only way to overcome the absurdity of a universe that seems indifferent to our search for meaning is to consciously rebel against it by finding purpose within the struggle itself. Sisyphus's victory, and by extension ours, is not in reaching the top of the mountain, but in the defiant act of choosing to push the boulder again. It is about reclaiming autonomy in the one place it can never be taken from us, our own mindset. The moment Sisyphus accepts his task and makes it his own is the moment he triumphs over his punishment. He is no longer a slave to the gods, he is the master of his own response. This philosophical interpretation transforms the myth from a simple warning into a powerful guide. It cautions us against accepting lives of passive compliance and unthinking routine. The warning is to actively seek out and create meaning in our work, to strive for roles that allow for creativity and self-determination, and to fight for systems both corporate and societal that recognize the human need for purposeful contribution. It urges us to never simply be the person pushing the rock, but to always ask why the rock is being pushed and to have a hand in determining the path up the mountain. By finding small victories, personal growth, or shared camaraderie in our daily tasks, we inject meaning into the void. We stop the boulder from rolling all the way back down in our minds, ensuring that each push, no matter how small, moves us forward in some way. Sisyphus teaches us that the alternative to finding meaning is an internal hell of our own making, a fate far worse than any external punishment. From the existential treadmill of Sisyphus, we turn to a myth that explores a different kind of prison, one not built by the gods, but constructed from within by our own gaze. The story of Narcissus, another poignant tale from Greek mythology, begins with a prophecy. A seer tells the beautiful youth's mother that her son will live a long life, but only if he never comes to know himself. Narcissus grows up to be breathtakingly handsome, so captivating that everyone who sees him falls in love, yet he is emotionally cold and utterly uninterested in the affections of others, spurning all admirers with a haughty disdain. One day, after hunting in the woods, he stops to drink from a perfectly still, clear pool of water. As he leans over, he catches sight of his own reflection. For the very first time, he is captivated. He falls deeply, desperately in love with the beautiful face staring back at him, not realizing it is merely an image. He cannot tear himself away, transfixed by his own perfection. He reaches out to touch the figure, but it vanishes into ripples. He stays by the pool, pining for a love that can never be returned, unable to eat, drink, or sleep, and eventually wastes away, consumed by a love that was only ever for himself. This ancient story is a masterclass in diagnosing a profound human vulnerability. Narcissus's demise wasn't caused by the reflection itself, but by his inability to recognize it as just that, a superficial image, a hollow echo of his true self. His tragedy was a catastrophic failure of self-awareness. He mistook the surface for depth, the image for reality, and in doing so, he became trapped in a closed loop of self-adoration that severed his connection to the living, breathing world around him. The pool became his entire universe, and the only person in it was a phantom. The myth serves as a stark warning against the seductive trap of vanity, self-absorption, and the corrosive neglect of genuine community. It illustrates how an excessive, unexamined focus on the self doesn't lead to self-knowledge, but to a profound and fatal isolation. The relevance of this thousands-year-old story to our modern digital age is almost unnerving. Social media platforms have become our global reflecting pool, offering endless opportunities to curate and gaze upon our own image. We craft idealized digital personas, carefully selecting the most flattering angles, the most impressive accomplishments, and the most enviable experiences to present to the world. The likes and comments function as a constant, validating ripple on the water's surface, reinforcing our focus on how we are perceived. This environment can actively cultivate a narcissistic culture where external validation is relentlessly pursued and self-worth becomes dangerously tethered to online metrics of approval. The pursuit of followers can eclipse the nurturing of real friendships, and the performance of a perfect life can replace the messy, authentic experience of living it. Like Narcissus, we risk becoming so captivated by our own reflection that we neglect the nourishing connections that exist beyond the screen, the conversations that don't get posted, the struggles that don't look glamorous, and the people who love us for our uncurated selves. This self-obsession has tangible consequences that ripple outward, eroding the very fabric of social bonds. Empathy, the ability to understand and share the feelings of another, requires us to look up and out to truly see and engage with other people. A narcissistic focus, whether individual or cultural, starves empathy. It creates a world where everyone is the star of their own movie, viewing others merely as supporting characters or an audience. This can lead to a decline in civic engagement, a lack of compassion for those in need, and a polarized public discourse where understanding opposing viewpoints feels impossible because we are too busy asserting our own. The myth warns that a society of individuals staring into their own pools is a society that is fragmented, lonely, and vulnerable to decay, as the shared projects and mutual responsibilities that hold a community together are forgotten. Yet the deeper lesson of Narcissus is not to hate oneself or to reject any form of self-regard. The original prophecy held the key: he could live a long life if he never knew himself. The ancient Greek imperative, "Know thyself," was inscribed at the temple of Apollo at Delphi, representing the pinnacle of wisdom. This suggests that Narcissus's fatal error wasn't self-love, but a profound and tragic misunderstanding of the self. He knew only his surface. True self-knowledge is a journey inward that acknowledges both light and shadow, strengths and flaws. It is a humble, ongoing process that ultimately connects us to our shared humanity, not one that isolates us in a bubble of superiority. The antidote to the trap of Narcissus is to balance a healthy sense of self with a genuine curiosity about others, to value humility over hubris, and to actively cultivate empathy by stepping away from the reflective pool to engage in the rich, complex, and beautiful world of human connection that exists all around us. Where Narcissus's downfall stemmed from a gaze turned entirely inward, the myth of Prometheus presents a figure whose vision was cast outward, toward the empowerment of all humanity, yet whose actions still carried a devastating and complex price. In the Greek tradition, Prometheus, whose name means forethought, was a titan who sided with the Olympian gods in their great war, but his story is defined by a profound act of rebellion. He looked upon the nascent human race living in darkness, fear, and cold, and was moved by compassion. Defying the direct command of Zeus, who wished to keep humanity weak and subservient, Prometheus ascended to Olympus and stole fire from the chariot of the sun. He delivered this divine spark to mortals hidden within a fennel stalk. This single gift was nothing less than the catalyst for civilization itself. With fire, humans could now cook food, ward off predators, forge metal tools, and ultimately gather around a hearth to share stories and build communities. It was the dawn of technology, culture, and progress. Yet this act of profound benevolence was met with a punishment of equally profound cruelty. An enraged Zeus had Prometheus captured and chained to a desolate mountain peak in the Caucasus. There, every day, a giant eagle would descend to tear out his liver and feast upon it. Because Prometheus was immortal, his liver would grow back each night, only for the agonizing cycle to begin again at dawn, an eternal torture for a single act of theft. This stark duality is the very heart of the myth's warning. The fire Prometheus brought was not inherently good or evil. It was a tool of immense potential, and its ultimate impact depended entirely on the hands and the wisdom of those who wielded it. The same flame that could warm a home and cook a meal could also be used to forge weapons of war and burn down villages. Innovation, the myth insists, is a double-edged sword, bringing both incredible progress and profound new risks. Prometheus's suffering represents the inevitable burden and responsibility that comes with any great leap forward. We live in the world Prometheus helped create, and we are constantly grappling with the consequences of our own stolen fire. The digital revolution, for instance, has given us the internet, a tool that connects billions, democratizes information, and fuels global innovation. Yet this very same technology has also created unprecedented avenues for surveillance, cyber warfare, the spread of misinformation, and deep social division. We gained a global village, but we are still learning how to peacefully and ethically govern it. Similarly, the Promethean gift of genetic engineering holds the miraculous promise of ending hereditary diseases and ensuring food security for millions. But it also forces us to confront terrifying ethical chasms, the potential for creating genetic hierarchies, the unintended ecological consequences of modified organisms, and the fundamental question of how much we should alter the very blueprint of life. In each case, the innovation itself is neutral. Its moral weight is defined by the responsibility, or lack thereof, with which we choose to steward it. What makes Prometheus such an enduring and tragic hero, however, is that he embodies the innovator's sacrifice. He saw a future of human potential that was worth personal, eternal agony. He represents the visionary scientist, the bold engineer, the social reformer who pushes boundaries for the betterment of all, often facing condemnation, ridicule, or persecution in their own time. Their foresight is a form of punishment, as they can clearly see both the dazzling benefits and the potential catastrophes that others refuse to acknowledge. The myth warns us not to vilify these forward thinkers, but to listen to them. It argues that the answer to the risks of innovation is not to reject progress out of fear, like a new Zeus demanding we return the fire, but to embrace the burden of foresight that Prometheus's name represents. It is a call for proactive ethics, for building guardrails and considering consequences before we release a new technology into the world, not after the damage is done. Ultimately, the story of Prometheus is not a cautionary tale against innovation itself, but a foundational lesson in the inseparable link between power and responsibility. His stolen fire was not a malicious act, it was an act of liberation. His punishment was not for helping humanity, but for defying an authority that sought to keep knowledge and power concentrated at the top. The true warning is against innovation without oversight, progress without purpose, and power without compassion. It teaches us that every leap forward must be accompanied by a deep and humble commitment to stewarding that power wisely, to anticipating its secondary effects, and to ensuring that the fire we carry forward illuminates the path for all, rather than burning everything in its path. This nuanced understanding of progress as a sacred responsibility perfectly sets the stage for a closer look at another innovator from these same stories, a figure who, despite his wisdom, could not prevent a tragedy born from human nature itself. While Prometheus illustrates the moral burden of the innovator who defies the gods, the story of his mortal counterpart, Daedalus, brings that struggle down to a heartbreakingly human scale, reminding us that wisdom and good intentions are sometimes tragically insufficient against the unpredictable nature of those we seek to empower. Daedalus, the legendary craftsman and architect, was a figure of unparalleled genius, the father of invention itself. He designed the infamous labyrinth to contain the Minotaur, a structure so complex that he himself could barely find his way out. Yet his greatest creation was born not from a desire for glory, but from a desperate love for his son, Icarus. Imprisoned with the boy by King Minos of Crete, high in the tower that his own genius had built, Daedalus conceived a breathtakingly audacious escape plan. He crafted 2 pairs of wings from feathers gathered from the birds and fixed them with wax, fashioning a means of flight that was, for its time, a miracle of biomimetic engineering. This was not the act of a reckless titan, but of a careful, thoughtful, and deeply responsible creator. Before their flight, he gave Icarus explicit, meticulous instructions, a pre-flight briefing that outlined the precise parameters for safe travel. He defined the operational envelope: do not fly too low where the sea's moisture will clog the wings, and crucially, do not fly too high where the sun's heat will melt the wax. The path to freedom, he insisted, was the disciplined middle course. Herein lies the profound and often overlooked tragedy of Daedalus. He did everything a brilliant and responsible innovator could possibly do. He identified the need, designed an elegant solution, understood its limitations intimately, and provided clear, unambiguous safety protocols. His failure was not one of engineering or foresight, but of influence. He could not control the human element, the youthful exuberance, the intoxicating thrill of a newfound power, the hubris that made his son believe the rules were for others. Daedalus watched in horror as Icarus, drunk on the ecstasy of flight, soared ever upward, ignoring his father's cries. The wax softened, the feathers scattered, and the boy fell. The creator's greatest triumph became the instrument of his ultimate despair. He had built a perfect machine, but he could not engineer the fallible human heart that would operate it. This myth serves as a critical evolution in our understanding of innovation's warnings. It moves beyond the Promethean question of whether we should innovate to the Daedalian challenge of how we manage the innovation once it is released into the wild. Daedalus represents every engineer who signs off on a fault-tolerant system, every policymaker who drafts comprehensive regulations, every parent who gives a teenager the keys to a car with a full tank of gas and a stern warning. His story is a solemn reminder that the most perfect design can be undone by a single point of failure, a human unpredictability. It argues that true responsibility does not end at the drawing board or the launch pad. It requires anticipating not just mechanical failure, but psychological and behavioral failure as well. We see Daedalus's dilemma play out in our most advanced technological fields. The developers of social media platforms built incredibly sophisticated networks for connection, perhaps not foreseeing how their algorithms could be exploited to spread misinformation, erode mental health, and amplify societal division. They designed a powerful tool for communication, but couldn't fully account for how millions of individual human choices would interact with that tool at scale. In the realm of financial engineering, quantitative analysts created complex derivative products designed to manage risk, models that were mathematically sound within their own parameters. Yet, these very instruments contributed to the global financial crisis when human greed and a widespread suspension of disbelief overrode the model's inherent cautions. The creators, like Daedalus, built a system for flight, but the users, driven by a different kind of hunger, flew too close to the sun. The enduring lesson of Daedalus is not that we should stop building wings for fear they might be misused. That path leads to stagnation. Instead, his grief teaches us the imperative of building better safeguards, of designing systems with a deeper understanding of human nature baked into their core. It's the principle of the safety net beneath the high wire, the circuit breaker in the stock market, the parental controls on an internet browser. It is a call for redundant systems, not just in engineering, but in policy and education. Daedalus's warning is to pair our brilliant designs with an equally brilliant investment in training, in ongoing oversight, and in cultivating the wisdom and humility needed to use powerful tools wisely. His story forces us to ask not only can we build it, but also, how do we ensure it builds a better world, even when we can't be there to hold the user's hand? It is a heartbreaking but necessary lesson in humble stewardship, a recognition that the final, most critical component in any system will always be the imperfect, unpredictable, and beautiful human being we are trying to elevate. If the story of Daedalus is a tragedy of external creation gone awry, the myth of the Minotaur plunges us into the terror of a monster born from within, a chilling allegory for the destructive impulses we lock away but can never truly escape. The tale begins with a grievous offense against the gods by King Minos of Crete, who refused to sacrifice a magnificent white bull as he had promised to Poseidon. In retribution, the god of the sea inflicted a cruel and unnatural punishment. He made Minos' wife, Pasiphae, fall into a mad, obsessive passion for the very same animal. From this twisted union was born the Minotaur, a monstrous creature with the body of a man and the head of a bull, a living, breathing symbol of shame, bestial desire, and royal hubris. Horrified and desperate to contain this embodiment of his family's sin, King Minos commissioned the brilliant Daedalus to build an inescapable prison, the Labyrinth. This was no ordinary maze. It was a complex, shifting prison of the mind, a place of shadows and confusing turns designed to disorient and trap both the monster and anyone who dared enter. The Minotaur wasn't just kept in a dungeon. It was hidden away in the most intricate and secret recesses of the kingdom, a physical manifestation of a truth too terrible to look at directly. This is where the myth transcends a simple monster story and becomes one of our most powerful psychological warning systems. The labyrinth is not just a building, it is a profound metaphor for the human subconscious, the tangled, confusing pathways of our own minds where we lock away the parts of ourselves we fear or are ashamed of, our repressed traumas, our violent urges, our secret jealousies, our destructive addictions. The Minotaur is the terrifying embodiment of that repressed shadow self, the beast that grows ever hungrier and more powerful the longer it is ignored and left to fester in the dark. The myth warns us in no uncertain terms that we cannot simply wall off our inner demons and pretend they do not exist. Neglect is not a strategy, it is an invitation for eventual catastrophic eruption. The creature must be fed, and for the Athenians this meant a gruesome tribute of 7 young men and 7 young women sent into the maze every 9 years, a horrifying cost of refusing to confront the central horror. The monster always exacts its price, whether in personal self-sabotage, broken relationships, or societal violence. The modern parallels to this ancient story are both deeply personal and expansively societal. On an individual level, the Minotaur's labyrinth represents the maze of untreated mental health struggles. Anxiety, depression, or past trauma can become the monster we try to hide away, pretending we're fine while we navigate a daily, exhausting inner maze of avoidance and fear. The longer we avoid seeking help, the longer we refuse to enter the labyrinth with a thread of self-awareness and courage, the more power the Minotaur has over our lives, consuming our peace, our joy, and our potential. On a collective scale, the myth perfectly illustrates how societies deal with their own hidden shames and systemic injustices. A nation's unresolved history of racial violence, its embedded economic inequalities, or its cultural prejudices are its Minotaurs. We build complex social labyrinths of denial, deflection, and complicated bureaucracy to avoid confronting these ugly truths head-on. But like the mythical Athenians, we still pay a terrible tribute in the form of social unrest, political polarization, and cyclical violence because the monster, unfed and unaddressed, demands its due. The hero of this story, Theseus, provides the crucial second half of the warning. Not only must we confront the monster, but we must do so with a plan. He did not simply charge into the labyrinth swinging his sword blindly. His success depended on 2 critical tools, the sword given to him by his father to slay the beast, and the ball of thread given to him by Princess Ariadne to find his way back out. This is the myth's genius. It champions both courage and strategy, raw force and intelligent guidance. The sword represents the direct, courageous action we must take to face our fears, to do the hard work of therapy, to have the difficult conversation, to acknowledge the painful truth. But the thread is perhaps even more important. It symbolizes the lifeline we need to navigate the confusing journey of confrontation. This thread can be a support system of friends and family, the guidance of a therapist or mentor, a structured program of recovery, or a clear set of principles to guide us. It is what ensures that after we brave the darkness and do battle with our inner monster, we can find our way back into the light, integrated and whole, rather than becoming lost forever in the maze of our own pain. Theseus's victory teaches us that we are not meant to live in perpetual fear of what lurks in our personal or collective labyrinths. The goal is not to forever feed the Minotaur with sacrifices of our well-being, but to muster the heroic courage to descend into the darkness, thread in hand, and face it directly. The warning is that ignorance is not bliss, it is a ticking time bomb. By bringing our monsters into the light of awareness, by understanding their origin and their nature, we rob them of their power. We transform them from terrifying beasts into understood parts of our history, which can then be integrated and healed. This act of courageous confrontation is the only path to true freedom from the maze, a lesson that prepares us to examine the next myth, which explores a different kind of internal struggle, one born not of monstrous repression, but of simple human impatience and doubt. The haunting melody of Orpheus's lyre was said to be so beautiful it could charm wild beasts, make trees and rocks uproot themselves to follow him, and even move the stony hearts of the gods of the underworld. His myth is one of the most poignant in all of Greek tradition, not because it ends in triumph, but because it ends in a failure so devastatingly human that its warning echoes across millennia. After his beloved wife, Eurydice, died from a snake bite on their wedding day, a grief-stricken Orpheus did what no mortal had ever dared. He descended into the realm of Hades to bring her back. Using the only weapon he had, his music, he played for the rulers of the dead, Hades and Persephone. His song was so filled with genuine love and profound sorrow that it moved them to tears. Moved by this unprecedented display, they agreed to his request. They would release Eurydice to return with him to the world of the living, but on one critical, non-negotiable condition. He must walk ahead of her and not look back until they had both completely exited the underworld and reached the sunlight. It was a test of faith, a trial of trust in the god's word and in the process itself. The journey back was long, dark, and utterly silent. Orpheus could not hear her footsteps behind him. He had only the word of the deities of death to go on. As he neared the end of the tunnel, seeing the first glimpse of the living world's light, a terrible, gnawing doubt seized him. Was she really there? Had the gods tricked him? Had she stumbled? In a moment of agonizing impatience and desperate need for reassurance, he broke the condition. He turned to look, and in that instant he saw her, his beautiful Eurydice, her face filled with love and sadness. But the moment his eyes met hers, she was torn from him, pulled back into the depths, this time forever. His single glance of doubt had shattered the entire endeavor. He had her, and then, because he could not trust the process and wait until the journey was truly complete, he lost her for good. This myth cuts to the core of a universal human weakness. Orpheus's failure wasn't a lack of love, effort, or courage. He had all of those in abundance. His undoing was a momentary lapse in trust and a surrender to impatience. He was so close to the finish line that he could taste it, and that very proximity made the uncertainty unbearable. The story warns us that for certain profound goals, the final and most difficult part of the journey is not about doing more, but about having the disciplined patience to see a process through to its absolute conclusion without second-guessing it. It's about trusting that the path will hold even when we can't immediately see the proof. His backward glance is the embodiment of that self-sabotaging impulse that undermines so many of our own well-intentioned efforts right at the very brink of success. We see the ghost of Orpheus's doubt in the modern struggle to build anything of lasting value. Consider the process of healing, whether from a physical injury or a psychological wound. A patient might undergo weeks of successful therapy or rehabilitation, feeling significantly better, but then grows impatient and decides to skip the final, crucial stages of treatment, convinced they are cured. This premature conclusion often leads to a relapse, undoing all the progress made. In the world of entrepreneurship, an inventor might pour years into developing a revolutionary product, only to abandon the project right before a breakthrough because a prototype didn't get immediate market traction. Their doubt in the long-term vision and their impatience for quick results causes them to look back, effectively killing their own creation. Even in relationships, the pattern holds true. After a serious argument, a couple might engage in the hard work of reconciliation, offering apologies and making promises. But if one partner, plagued by insecurity, constantly looks back to dredge up the past mistake, seeking perpetual reassurance, that very lack of trust can poison the new beginning and prevent the relationship from ever truly leaving the dark place it was in. The profound tragedy of Orpheus is that his doubt created the very reality he feared. By turning around to see if she was there, he ensured that she wasn't. This is the ultimate warning about the self-fulfilling prophecy of impatience. Our doubt can manifest the failure we are trying to avoid. The myth doesn't criticize his love or his effort. It criticizes his lack of faith at the critical juncture. It teaches that for the most important journeys in life, recovery, creation, love, and growth, we must learn to walk forward in faith, even when we cannot hear the footsteps behind us. It is a call to trust the process, to believe in the word of those we have chosen to trust, including our own past decisions, and to understand that some transformations require us to sit in the darkness of uncertainty without turning around for a quick, reassuring glance. This hard-won lesson in patience and unwavering commitment provides a crucial bridge to our next myth, which flips the script entirely, showing us a hero who embraced immense challenges with relentless perseverance, transforming his labors into a path of redemption and strength. Where Orpheus's story ended in a moment of doubt that unraveled everything, the myth of Hercules presents a hero who, despite being plagued by his own demons, chose to meet his monumental challenges not with a backward glance, but with relentless forward motion. His story begins not in glory, but in a profound personal catastrophe. In a fit of madness inflicted upon him by the goddess Hera, Hercules unknowingly killed his own wife and children. Upon waking to the horror of what he had done, he was consumed by a guilt so deep that he sought purification from the oracle at Delphi. Instead of absolution, he was given a penance that seemed designed to be impossible. He must travel to his rival, King Eurystheus, and complete any 12 labors the king demanded. These were not simple tasks, they were a catalogue of nightmares, each one pitting him against monstrous beasts, seemingly invincible foes, and terrifying journeys to the edge of the known world. The Hydra, a serpent with regenerating heads, the Nemean lion with an impenetrable hide, capturing the hellhound Cerberus from the gates of the underworld itself, each labor was a test designed to break him, body and soul. Yet, this is where the myth transforms from a simple story of punishment into a powerful blueprint for redemption. Hercules' journey is the ultimate metaphor for confronting the seemingly impossible tasks life throws our way. His initial crime represents our own moments of catastrophic error, the times we fail ourselves and others in ways that feel irredeemable. The 12 labors are those overwhelming burdens that follow, the long, painful process of rebuilding after a financial collapse, the grueling journey of recovery from addiction or illness, the arduous task of mending relationships shattered by betrayal. The myth warns us directly against the temptation to avoid these difficulties, to run from the shame or the sheer scale of the work required. Hercules could have chosen despair. Instead, he chose the labors. He teaches us that the path out of our personal hells is not around the obstacles, but directly through them, and that the very act of engagement is where we reclaim our agency and our honor. But Hercules' success was never just about brute strength. If it were, he would have failed immediately. The Nemean lion's hide could not be pierced by any weapon, so Hercules had to use his wits to strangle it. The Hydra grew 2 heads for every one he cut off, so he needed the help of his nephew Iolaus to cauterize the necks, a lesson in collaboration and innovative thinking. To clean the vast Augean stables in a single day, he rerouted 2 rivers, solving the problem with engineering intelligence rather than manual labor. This is the second crucial layer of the myth's warning. Overcoming adversity requires more than just force. It demands virtue, wisdom, and strategic thinking. It's about applying the right tool, the right mindset, and the right help to the challenge at hand. This translates perfectly to our modern struggles. We can't muscle our way through a complex problem like climate change or social inequality. It requires the virtues of patience for long-term policy, wisdom to invest in green technology, justice to ensure equitable solutions, and collaboration across borders. On a personal level, healing a deep emotional wound doesn't just take time. It requires the virtue of courage to be vulnerable, the wisdom to seek therapy, and the perseverance to practice new, healthier patterns every single day. Ultimately, the 12 labors were not just a punishment to be endured, they were a transformative curriculum. Each task forced Hercules to develop a new skill, a deeper resilience, and a stronger character. By the time he faced his final labor, descending into Hades to retrieve Cerberus, he was no longer the same man who had killed his family in an uncontrollable rage. He had mastered his strength, tempered his impulses, and proven his worth through unwavering ethical action. His journey symbolizes the alchemy of turning suffering into strength and misery into meaning. The labors did not erase his past, but they allowed him to build a future so monumental that he would be remembered not for his worst mistake, but for his greatest triumphs. His story is a permanent reminder that our greatest adversities are not roadblocks on our path. For those with the courage to face them with virtue, they are the path. If the labors of Hercules teach us that overcoming immense challenges forges strength and virtue, the story of his divine cousin, Phaethon, offers a terrifying counterpoint, a lesson in what happens when someone is granted power they are utterly unprepared to wield. This tragic tale from Greek mythology begins not with a quest but with a boast. Phaethon, the young mortal son of the sun god Helios, is taunted by his friends who doubt his divine parentage. To prove his lineage, he travels to the radiant palace of the sun and begs his father for proof. Moved by his son's plea and bound by a sacred oath to grant him any wish, Helios agrees. But his pride turns to sheer terror when Phaethon makes his request. He asks to drive his father's magnificent sun chariot for a single day. Helios immediately understands the catastrophe to come. He pleads with his son, warning him that not even Zeus himself could control the fiery steeds that pull the sun. The chariot's path is a precisely calibrated arc across the heavens. Even a slight deviation would scorch the earth or freeze it. But Phaethon, blinded by his need to prove himself and intoxicated by the promise of such glory, refuses to back down. Bound by his oath, a heartbroken Helios has no choice but to hand over the reins. What follows is one of the most vivid depictions of catastrophic failure in all of mythology. The moment Phaethon takes the reins, the powerful horses sense his weakness and inexperience. They bolt, first soaring so high that the earth freezes, then plunging so low that cities are set ablaze, rivers boil away, and the very skin of the earth cracks open in great chasms. The heavens themselves are thrown into chaos, with constellations scrambling to avoid the careening inferno. To prevent the total annihilation of creation, Zeus is forced to intervene with a thunderbolt, striking the boy from the chariot and sending him plummeting to his death. Phaethon's single day of power ends not in the glory he imagined, but in universal calamity and his own utter destruction. The myth is a stark and unforgiving warning against the lethal combination of unpreparedness and unearned authority. It's not a story about a villain. It's about a well-intentioned but fatally arrogant youth who simply did not know what he was doing, and whose lack of competence unleashed forces he could neither understand nor control. This ancient narrative finds its echo in every corner of our modern world, where the reins of immense power are often handed to those who lack the training, humility, or respect for the role. In the political arena, we see the Phaethon dynamic play out when a charismatic leader rises to power on the strength of populist rhetoric rather than a deep understanding of governance, diplomacy, or economics. Their bold promises to take the reins and steer the nation to new heights can quickly lead to international incidents, economic turmoil, and social unrest when that confidence is untethered from experience. The complex machinery of state, like the sun chariot, requires a steady, knowledgeable hand. Without it, the entire system can veer wildly off course, leaving scorched earth in its wake. The myth warns us to be deeply skeptical of those who seek power for the glory of it, rather than from a sense of sober responsibility and proven capability. The corporate world is equally littered with tales of Phaethon-like figures. A brilliant young founder or a visionary CEO might be gifted with revolutionary technology or a dominant market position, the modern equivalent of the sun chariot. But if that leader lacks the humility to listen to seasoned advisors, ignores the established rules of the market, or pushes for unsustainable, scorched earth growth, the results can be equally devastating. We've seen companies like Theranos, where the reckless drive for glory without a proven product incinerated billions in investor wealth and shattered public trust. Or the litany of startups that burned through capital at a furious pace, only to crash and lay off their entire workforce when they realized they never had a viable path to control their own trajectory. In these cases, the failure wasn't a lack of ambition, but a profound lack of respect for the difficulty of the task and the limits of their own competence. Perhaps the most potent modern parallel lies in our relationship with technology itself. Humanity has, in many ways, been handed the reins to powers that were once the sole domain of myth, the ability to edit the very code of life with CRISPR, to create intelligences that may one day surpass our own with AI, and to alter the climate of our entire planet through industry. We are, right now, collectively in Phaethon's position. The question is whether we are driving the chariot or merely holding the reins while it runs wild. Are we approaching these god-like technologies with the humility, foresight, and rigorous ethical training they demand? Or are we, like the boy, too intoxicated by the sheer glory of our own ingenuity to heed the warnings of those who understand the risks? The myth screams that we must not make Phaethon's fatal error, mistaking possession for mastery. True authority is not granted by a title or access to a tool. It is earned through years of painstaking preparation, a deep respect for the limits of the system, and the wisdom to know that some forces are too great to be controlled by pride alone. The sun chariot does not care who holds the reins. It will follow its natural laws, and it is the driver's solemn duty to understand them completely, or the consequences will be felt by everyone. From the fiery downfall of Phaethon, a cautionary tale about the reckless misuse of power, we now turn inward to a quieter, yet equally devastating, form of loss: the erosion of one's own voice. The myth of Echo introduces us to a nymph whose story is a haunting lament for identity itself. In the rich tapestry of Greek mythology, Echo was a talkative nymph, fond of conversation and stories. But she made a fatal error. She used her gift of speech to distract the goddess Hera with long tales while Zeus, Hera's husband, pursued his various romantic affairs. When Hera discovered the deception, her punishment was as cruel as it was poetic. She did not strike Echo mute. Instead, she cursed her. Echo would never again be able to speak her own thoughts or initiate a conversation. She could only repeat the last few words spoken by someone else. Her voice, the very essence of her identity and connection to the world, was reduced to a hollow mimicry, a mere reflection of others. This curse is one of the most psychologically insightful punishments in all of mythology because it attacks not the body but the soul. Echo's torment was a profound isolation, trapped within her own mind, bursting with thoughts and feelings she could never express. She became a prisoner of other people's conversations, only able to participate as an afterthought, an echo. The myth is a powerful allegory for the experience of losing one's voice, whether through external oppression or internalized conformity. It symbolizes the terrible cost of being silenced, of having your unique perspective, your stories, and your truth suppressed until all that remains is the ability to parrot the words and ideas of others. Her story is a permanent warning against any force, be it societal, political, or cultural, that seeks to homogenize thought and strip individuals of their authentic expression. We can see the shadow of Echo's curse stretching long into our modern world, manifesting in both blatant and subtle ways. In its most extreme form, it appears as outright censorship, where authoritarian regimes systematically silence dissenting voices, controlling media and punishing those who dare to speak a truth that challenges the official narrative. In these environments, citizens are forced to become echoes, repeating state-sanctioned propaganda for their own safety, while their own critical thoughts remain unspoken, locked away. But the curse also operates in more insidious, everyday ways. Consider the pressure to conform within corporate cultures or social media ecosystems, where deviating from the popular opinion can lead to social ostracism or professional retaliation. This environment fosters a kind of intellectual and emotional groupthink, where people begin to self-censor, shaping their expressed views to mirror the dominant tone around them. They may hold diverse, nuanced opinions internally, but externally, they only echo the last thing they heard, fearful of the consequences of originality. This loss of voice has a corrosive effect that extends far beyond the individual. When people feel they cannot speak their truth, society as a whole is impoverished. Innovation stagnates because groundbreaking ideas often sound strange and disruptive at first. Social progress halts because speaking out against injustice is the first step toward remedying it. True connection withers because relationships are built on the foundation of authentic sharing, not on the performance of saying what we think others want to hear. A culture of echoes is a culture that has lost its melody, its harmony, and its capacity for genuine dialogue. It becomes a monotonous landscape where the same few ideas bounce back and forth, growing fainter with each repetition, never challenged, never enriched, never renewed. Yet the myth of echo does not end without a glimmer of tragic agency, and it is here that we find its most profound warning. After being cursed, Echo falls deeply in love with the beautiful youth Narcissus. But her curse makes expressing this love impossible. She can only follow him, waiting for him to speak so she might echo his words back to him. When Narcissus, enamored with his own reflection, eventually rejects her and everyone else, the gods punish him by turning him into a flower. But Echo's fate is different. She does not transform, she simply fades away, her body consumed by grief until nothing is left but her voice, a voice that still repeats, found in caves and lonely mountains. This ending is crucial. Even in her faded state, her voice persists. It is a reminder that the urge to speak, to connect, to be heard, is fundamentally human and incredibly resilient. The warning, therefore, is not to let that voice fade to an echo in the first place. It is a call to fiercely protect our own right to self-expression, and just as importantly, to actively listen for and amplify the authentic voices of others, especially those who are being silenced. It urges us to create spaces in our homes, our workplaces, and our societies where every person feels safe to offer their original thought, knowing it will be met not with dismissal, but with the respect that a unique and irreplaceable perspective deserves. While many Greek heroes were defined by their strength or divine favor, the story of Atalanta introduces a different kind of power, one that resides in sheer skill and a defiant spirit that refused to be caged by the expectations of her time. Abandoned in the wilderness as an infant because her father desired a son, Atalanta was saved and raised by a she-bear, a fitting beginning for a woman who would embody a wild, untamable nature. She grew to become a hunter of legendary ability, faster than any man and a peerless warrior, eventually earning a place among the famed Argonauts on their quest for the Golden Fleece. Her very existence was a challenge to the rigid gender roles of ancient Greece, a society where women were largely confined to the domestic sphere. Atalanta's prowess with a spear and her unmatched speed on the footrace were not just personal talents, they were a living, breathing rebuttal to the notion that potential is determined by gender. She forced a world that wanted to ignore her to instead stop and acknowledge that excellence knows no such boundaries. Her most famous myth, however, cuts directly to the heart of the societal pressures designed to force even the most independent woman into a conventional mold. After being reunited with her father, who now sought to marry her off, Atalanta agreed to wed, but only on her own radical terms. She declared that any suitor who wished to win her hand must first defeat her in a footrace. The stakes were brutally clear. Victory would earn him a wife, but loss would cost him his life. This was more than a simple contest. It was a brilliant strategic move. It placed the burden of performance and risk squarely on the men, inverting the traditional dynamic where women were passive prizes to be won. For a long time, it worked. Atalanta effortlessly outran every challenger, preserving her autonomy and demonstrating that on a fair field of merit, she was more than their equal. She created a system where her value was based solely on her ability, and in doing so, she exposed the inadequacy of those who felt entitled to her solely based on their gender. The tragic turn of the myth arrives not through fair competition, but through deception and a rejection of the very meritocracy Atalanta had established. A suitor named Hippomenes, aware he could never beat her fairly, resorted to trickery. He prayed to the goddess Aphrodite, who provided him with 3 irresistible golden apples. During the race, he threw these apples one by one onto the track. Atalanta, distracted by their beauty, stooped to retrieve each one, allowing Hippomenes to narrowly win the race and claim her as his wife. This ending is often misinterpreted as a romantic win, but in truth, it is the myth's core warning. Atalanta was not defeated by a better runner. She was undermined by a system that refused to accept her terms and instead introduced an unfair advantage, a metaphor for the countless ways societal structures are manipulated to maintain the status quo when merit alone fails. Her loss of autonomy serves as a stark lesson about the costs of conformity and the relentless pressure even the strongest individuals face to eventually comply with societal norms. Atalanta's ancient story reverberates powerfully in modern conversations about equality and inclusion. She represents every woman who has had to be twice as good to get half the credit, every person who has been told a particular career or role is not for them based on outdated stereotypes. Her race is mirrored in the ongoing struggle for pay equity, where women and minorities often find that pure merit is hampered by hidden obstacles and unconscious biases, the golden apples of a modern economy. Furthermore, the myth champions the profound benefit of inclusivity. By insisting on competing, Atalanta didn't just win for herself, she elevated the entire standard. She forced men to be better, to train harder, or to be more clever. This illustrates a vital truth. When we break down barriers and allow everyone to compete on their merits, we don't lower the bar, we raise it for everyone. Society gains access to a much wider pool of talent, skill, and perspective, driving innovation and progress in ways that are impossible when entire segments of the population are excluded from the race. Ultimately, Atalanta's legacy is not one of defeat but of enduring inspiration. She remains a symbol of the fierce fight for self-determination and the right to define one's own worth outside of prescribed roles. Her myth warns us of the clever, seductive distractions and systemic tricks that can still derail progress toward a truly equitable world. It urges us to stay focused on the finish line of a society where people are valued for what they can do, not limited by who they are presumed to be. Her story is a permanent call to clear the track of golden apples and let the best person win, because that is the only race that ultimately benefits us all. The story of Oedipus stands as one of the most psychologically complex and unsettling warnings in all of mythology. a masterclass in how the very actions we take to avoid a dreaded fate can become the engine that drives us straight toward it. The prophecy was clear from the start. The infant Oedipus was destined to grow up to kill his father and marry his mother. Horrified, his parents, the king and queen of Thebes, gave the order to have him exposed on a mountainside to die. But even this drastic act, born of fear and a desire to control the future, set in motion the chain of unintended consequences. The baby was found and adopted by another royal family, growing up in a neighboring kingdom believing himself to be their true son. When he later heard the same terrible prophecy, he fled his home out of love for the parents he knew, determined to never harm them. This flight, this virtuous act of filial protection, is the great tragic irony. It leads him directly to a crossroads where he gets into a quarrel with an arrogant older man and kills him unaware the man is his biological father, the king of Thebes. He continues on to the city, solves the riddle of the Sphinx, is hailed as a savior, and is awarded the vacant throne and the hand of the widowed queen, his own mother. Every step Oedipus takes to evade his destiny is in fact a step that seals it. His intelligence, his courage, and even his moral desire to avoid committing a heinous act all conspire to make the prophecy come true. This myth delves far deeper than a simple lesson about the inevitability of fate. Its true power as a warning system lies in its exploration of human blindness, not a physical lack of sight, but a willful psychological avoidance of uncomfortable truth. After becoming king, a plague strikes Thebes, and the oracle declares it will not lift until the murderer of the previous king is found and punished. Oedipus, the great riddle solver, launches a determined investigation, vowing to uncover the truth no matter where it leads. Yet as the evidence begins to point disturbingly toward him, those around him, like his wife and brother-in-law, beg him to stop the inquiry. They sense the horrifying reality and urge ignorance for the sake of peace. But Oedipus forges ahead, relentlessly pulling at the thread until the entire terrible tapestry of his life unravels before him. His pursuit of knowledge is heroic, but the myth asks a devastating question. Are we ever truly prepared for the truths we claim to seek? Oedipus's ultimate punishment is not the acts he committed in ignorance, but the overwhelming burden of full awareness. He blinds himself, a physical manifestation of his former inner blindness, declaring that his eyes could not look upon the misery they had created. The warning is that denying or remaining ignorant of deeper, uncomfortable realities, whether about ourselves, our families, or our societies, does not make them go away. It only allows them to fester and grow in the dark until they eventually erupt with catastrophic force. We see the Oedipus dynamic playing out in our own lives and institutions all the time. On a personal level, it appears in the form of inherited family trauma. An individual might grow up sensing a shadow over their family, a pattern of dysfunction, addiction, or broken relationships that everyone tacitly agrees never to discuss. Like Oedipus, they might make a conscious vow to be different to escape that legacy. Yet, without understanding the root of the pattern, they often find themselves unconsciously reenacting it, marrying a partner who echoes an absent parent or repeating cycles of conflict they swore they'd avoid. Their flight from the past, undertaken without self-awareness, leads them right back to its core. The myth urges us to stop fleeing and instead turn to face our personal histories with courageous inquiry, to understand the forces that shaped us so we can truly break the cycle, rather than just perpetuating it in a different form. On a societal scale, the plight of Oedipus resonates in our collective approach to history. Many nations have dark chapters, periods of colonialism, slavery, systemic injustice, or internal conflict that are glossed over in official narratives or school curriculums. The intention might be to avoid shame or to promote a unifying national identity, but this refusal to honestly confront the past, this willful blindness, functions exactly like the Theban plague. The unresolved injustices and suppressed truths don't disappear. They manifest as ongoing social strife, economic inequality, and political polarization in the present. The myth warns that the only path to healing is the difficult, Oedipus-like path of relentless investigation and acknowledgement, no matter how painful the revelations may be. It argues that a society, like an individual, cannot be whole until it has the courage to stare its own history directly in the face and accept responsibility for it. Ultimately, the legend of Oedipus is not a fatalistic argument that we are powerless against destiny. Instead, it is a profound call for radical self-awareness and intellectual humility. It suggests that our freedom lies not in trying to outrun our predetermined paths, but in striving to understand the complex forces, both internal and external, that influence our choices. By acknowledging the parts of ourselves we would rather keep hidden, by questioning our motives, and by being open to the uncomfortable possibility that we might be wrong, we gain a measure of agency over our lives. Oedipus's tragedy was that he only sought the truth about the murderer outside of himself. He never once turned his brilliant, questioning gaze inward until it was too late. His story remains an eternal warning to look within, to question the stories we tell ourselves, and to understand that the most important riddles we must solve are not those posed by monsters, but the ones we find lurking in the mirror. After the intense psychological journey of Oedipus, a story that turned the gaze painfully inward, the saga of the Argonauts swings the pendulum outward, celebrating the incredible power of looking beyond ourselves to achieve what is truly impossible alone. This epic myth recounts the voyage of the ship Argo, a vessel crewed not by a uniform band of soldiers, but by a dazzlingly diverse collection of Greece's greatest heroes. Their unified goal was to retrieve the legendary Golden Fleece, a task so daunting it required the unique talents of every single person on board. There was Hercules, whose raw strength could overcome physical barriers no one else could. Orpheus was there, whose music could soothe savage beasts and even calm the raging sea. Lynceus possessed vision so sharp he could see through solid earth, while Atalanta brought her peerless speed and hunting skills. The genius of the narrative is that no one hero, not even the leader Jason, could have succeeded on their own. Each formidable challenge they faced on their long journey demanded a different specialty, forcing them to rely on one another's strengths in a beautiful demonstration of collaborative synergy. The myth makes it abundantly clear that the greatest prize cannot be won by the individual, no matter how gifted. It is only accessible through the combined, trusting effort of a dedicated team. This ancient story serves as a direct warning against the seductive but dangerous illusion of isolationism and the pride of going it alone. The journey of the Argo was a delicate ecosystem of interdependence. If the crew had succumbed to distrust, jealousy, or selfish ambition, the mission would have collapsed immediately. They had to trust that the helmsman would navigate the treacherous clashing rocks, trust that the lookout would spot hidden dangers, and trust that the warrior would defend the ship when attacked. This level of trust is what allowed them to overcome obstacles like the harpies that spoiled their food, the bronze giant Tolos who guarded the shores of Crete, and the sleepless dragon that coiled around the fleece itself. The myth argues that distrust is not just a social failing. It is a critical strategic vulnerability that dooms any complex endeavor from the start. It cautions that the belief that we can handle everything ourselves, or that we must tightly control every variable, is a form of hubris as fatal as any discussed in these tales. In our modern, hyper-connected world, the Argonauts' lesson has never been more urgent. The Golden Fleece we now seek, solutions to truly existential global problems, is guarded by dragons far more complex than any mythical beast. Confronting a global pandemic requires more than just brilliant virologists. It demands the seamless collaboration of international governments to share data, of logistics experts to distribute vaccines, of manufacturers to scale production, and of the public to trust the process enough to participate. No single nation, no matter how powerful or wealthy, could have developed and distributed a COVID-19 vaccine in isolation. It was a triumph of global scientific cooperation. Similarly, the colossal challenge of climate change is the ultimate test of our collective will. It requires physicists, engineers, and climatologists to develop green technologies, but also economists to design carbon markets, politicians to craft international treaties, urban planners to redesign cities, and individuals to make sustainable choices. To believe that any one group can solve this alone is as naive as Jason believing he could snatch the fleece without his crew. The story also champions the immense value of cognitive diversity, the idea that the best solutions emerge from bringing together people with different skills, backgrounds, and ways of thinking. The Argo's crew was a masterpiece of this principle. When they were trapped by the sheer physical impossibility of the clashing rocks, it wasn't brute force that saved them. It was the clever strategy of releasing a dove to time the rock's movement, followed by the precise rowing of the entire crew on a unified command. This combination of intelligence, timing, and coordinated physical effort is a perfect metaphor for innovation. In our organizations and companies, the myth warns against building teams of people who all think the same way. The most resilient and innovative groups are those that, like the Argonauts, blend the analytical thinker with the creative visionary, the cautious planner with the bold risk-taker. It is in the friction and fusion of these different perspectives that truly original ideas are forged, ideas that can navigate the clashing rocks of market disruption and technological change. Ultimately, the saga of the Argonauts is a timeless blueprint for achieving the monumental. It teaches us that trust is not a soft skill, but the essential currency of great achievement. It is the glue that holds a diverse team together when faced with the inevitable storms and setbacks. The myth urges us to build our own modern Argo, whether it's a community project, a corporate initiative, or an international coalition, by carefully selecting a crew of varied talents, fostering a culture of deep mutual respect, and keeping our eyes fixed on the shared, glittering goal on the horizon. It reminds us that the most valuable treasure we can ever find is not a golden fleece, but the profound realization that our greatest strength has always lain in our ability to unite, to trust, and to journey together. Where the Argonauts celebrated the power of diverse, real-world collaboration, the myth of Pygmalion pulls us into the solitary workshop of an artist's mind, offering a stark warning about the dangers of retreating from the messy, imperfect real world into a fantasy of our own creation. In this ancient Greek tale, Pygmalion was a renowned sculptor, a man so disgusted by the flaws and perceived immoralities of the real women around him that he withdrew from society entirely. He decided to pour his idealism into his art, crafting a statue of a woman so exquisitely beautiful and so perfectly formed that no living being could possibly compare. He used ivory, a smooth, flawless medium, and poured all his skill into creating his ideal of feminine perfection, a figure entirely under his control, with no will, no opinion, and no messy human needs of her own. He became obsessed with his creation, dressing it in fine silks, bringing it gifts, and caressing its cold form, eventually praying to the goddess Aphrodite to bring his perfect ivory woman to life. Taking pity on him, the goddess granted his wish. The statue warmed into living flesh, and Pygmalion, ecstatic, married his own creation, seemingly getting exactly what he desired. On the surface, this might sound like a romantic story about the power of love and art, but dig deeper, and it reveals itself as one of mythology's most incisive critiques of idealism and objectification. Pygmalion did not fall in love with a person, he fell in love with an idea, a fantasy that he himself had carved. His rejection of real, imperfect women in favor of a silent, compliant statue is a profound form of arrogance. It represents the belief that we can improve upon nature and humanity itself by removing all that is unpredictable, challenging, or flawed. The myth warns that this pursuit of perfection is, at its heart, a rejection of authenticity. It is the preference for a beautiful illusion over a complicated reality, and it ultimately leads to a deeply lonely and controlling form of love. Pygmalion didn't want a partner. He wanted a possession, a mirror of his own ideals that would never talk back, never disagree, and never disappoint him by being anything other than exactly what he designed. This ancient dynamic is painfully relevant in our modern world, particularly in the age of social media and digitally curated lives. Platforms like Instagram and TikTok have become our collective ivory block, allowing us to sculpt and polish idealized versions of ourselves for public consumption. We apply filters to smooth our skin, carefully frame our lives to highlight only the most glamorous moments, and present a narrative of constant success, happiness, and aesthetic perfection. This is a modern-day Pygmalion project, but on a mass scale. We are not just creating statues, we are becoming them, performing an idealized version of life for an audience. The danger, as the myth warns, is that we start to prefer these polished illusions, both our own and those of others, over authentic human connection. We scroll through endless feeds of perfect bodies, perfect vacations, and perfect relationships, and these curated fantasies can make our own messy, ordinary lives feel inadequate by comparison. This can lead to a deep sense of dissatisfaction with reality, a phenomenon psychologists link to rising rates of anxiety and depression. We fall in love with the highlight reels of others and wonder why our own behind-the-scenes footage feels so lacking. The myth's warning extends powerfully into the realm of modern relationships. Dating apps, for instance, often encourage a Pygmalion-like approach to finding a partner. Profiles become a list of demanded perfect traits, a certain height, income, education, or set of hobbies, reducing complex human beings to a checklist of ideal attributes. People are swiped left or right based on how closely their curated image matches someone's pre-sculpted fantasy, a process that can objectify potential partners and set relationships up for failure the moment reality inevitably intrudes. No real person can ever be a perfect match for a fantasy, and the pursuit of this ideal can lead to a cycle of perpetual dissatisfaction, where promising connections are abandoned at the first sign of imperfection because they don't match the pristine statue in one's mind. This is the curse of Pygmalion. By seeking perfection, we blind ourselves to the beautiful, complicated, and genuine connections that are actually within our reach. Yet, the myth does offer a path toward redemption, and it's found in a subtle but crucial detail. When Aphrodite brings the statue to life, she is given a name, Galatea. This act of naming is symbolic of her transformation from an object, a thing that Pygmalion made, into a subject, a person with her own identity and presumably her own agency. The story, as told by the ancient sources, ends with the marriage, but it implicitly opens a new and more challenging chapter. Pygmalion now has to live with a real woman, not a statue. She will have her own thoughts, her own desires, her own bad days, and her own imperfections. The real test of Pygmalion's growth is whether he can love Galatea for who she truly is, not just for the perfect form he designed. This is the myth's ultimate lesson and its most hopeful warning. It encourages us to break our own ivory statues, to let go of rigid ideals and perfectionist fantasies. It calls us to embrace the glorious, unpredictable messiness of real life and real people, to find beauty not in flawlessness, but in authenticity, vulnerability, and the unique character that comes with a life fully lived. True connection, the story suggests, is not found in creating a perfect partner or a perfect self, but in learning to love and be loved, imperfections and all. Moving from the solitary idealism of Pygmalion, we encounter a myth where artistic pride erupts into a very public and devastating confrontation. The tale of Arachne plunges us into the bustling, competitive world of craft, where skill is everything and reputation is hard-won. Arachne was a young mortal woman, not of noble birth or divine lineage, but possessed with a truly extraordinary gift. Her skill at the loom was so breathtaking that nymphs would abandon their groves and rivers just to watch her work. The tapestries she wove were more than fabric. They were living stories, so vivid and real that people swore the flowers in her patterns emitted fragrance, and the depicted animals could almost be heard. Her talent was undeniable, a pure, raw genius that drew crowds and acclaim. But with that acclaim grew a dangerous and unchecked sense of pride. Arachne began to boast that her skill was not just equal to that of Athena, the goddess of wisdom and craft herself, but that it was superior. She openly challenged the divinity to a contest, declaring that if she lost, she would accept any punishment. This was not the healthy confidence of a skilled artisan. It was hubris of the highest order, a mortal placing herself on the same level as the very source of her inspiration. The goddess Athena, intrigued and perhaps a bit offended, decided to accept the challenge. She came to Arachne disguised as an old woman, offering the young weaver a chance to back down with grace. She warned her to be content with besting mortals and to always show due reverence to the gods, for whom gratitude was the proper offering for such a gift. But Arachne, blinded by her own arrogance, scoffed at the advice and repeated her challenge. At this, Athena shed her disguise and the contest began. Each set up her loom, and the air grew still as they began to weave. Athena's tapestry was a masterpiece of divine order and respect. In its center sat the gods in majestic glory on Mount Olympus, and in each of the four corners she wove a smaller scene depicting mortals who had been punished for daring to challenge the gods, a clear and direct warning to her opponent about the fate of hubris. Her work was perfect, majestic, and terrifying in its message. Arachne, utterly undaunted, wove a tapestry of stunning technical brilliance but deeply provocative content. She chose to depict the gods not in their glory, but in their moments of deepest moral failing, their deceptions, their infidelities, their cruelties towards mortals. Zeus transforming into a bull to abduct Europa, Poseidon tricking a maiden, Apollo pursuing Daphne. Every thread was an accusation, every image a masterpiece of insult. Her work was flawless in its execution, a true testament to her unparalleled skill, but it was utterly devoid of respect, gratitude, or humility. It was a deliberate and brilliant act of defiance. When the tapestries were complete, even Athena, in her fury, could find no technical fault with Arachne's work. The mortal had, by any objective measure of craft, matched the goddess. But she had lost the contest in a far more profound way. She had confused technical proficiency for ultimate authority, and in her relentless drive to prove her own superiority, she had severed the sacred connection between the creator, her craft, and the sources of her inspiration. Enraged by the arrogance and the ingratitude embodied in the beautiful but blasphemous tapestry, Athena struck Arachne. Overwhelmed with shame and despair, the young woman tried to hang herself. But the goddess, in a moment of chilling, transformative punishment, stopped her. "Live on, guilty woman," she declared, and sprinkled her with a potion from the goddess Hecate. Arachne's body shrank, her hair fell out, and she was transformed into a spider, condemned to swing from a thread and weave her beautiful webs for all eternity. This is the myth's devastating core. Arachne's punishment was not the denial of her craft, but its eternal reduction. She would still weave, but now in isolation, creating intricate, fragile, and ultimately meaningless webs to catch flies, rather than magnificent art to inspire humanity. Her fate is a warning that talent without respect, innovation without humility, and skill without gratitude ultimately lead to a barren existence, where one's great gifts become a lonely, repetitive, and disconnected curse. This ancient story speaks directly to our modern cult of disruptive genius and the often toxic relationship between innovation and tradition. Arachne represents the brilliant but arrogant tech founder who believes their revolutionary algorithm places them above established ethical norms or societal laws. She is the groundbreaking artist who, in their quest to shock and deconstruct, holds their audience and the entire history of their art form in contempt. Her myth cautions us that raw talent and technical innovation are not licenses for disrespect. True mastery understands that it stands on the shoulders of all that came before, the traditions, the rules, the very gods of the field, and acknowledges that debt with humility. It's the difference between a musician who masters classical theory before experimenting with jazz and one who dismisses all previous music as obsolete. The first builds upon a foundation, the second builds on sand. The myth does not champion blind obedience or stifling creativity. Athena's own tapestry celebrated the gods, but it also acknowledged the dark stories of mortal punishment. The warning is not against challenging authority or critiquing power structures. It is about the spirit in which that challenge is made. Arachne's work was not a thoughtful critique. It was a vicious, arrogant smear, designed solely to elevate herself by tearing others down. Her fate teaches us that the most powerful and enduring innovations are those that respect the boundaries of their medium and the wisdom of their tradition, even as they seek to push beyond them. It is a call for confident creators to balance their ambition with a sense of reverence, to understand that true greatness lies not in proving you are better than everything that came before, but in adding your unique, humble thread to the magnificent and ongoing tapestry of human achievement. If the myth of Arachne warns us about the pride that can isolate a creator, the story of Tantalus presents a far more visceral and universal torment, a punishment that preys not on the body, but on the most fundamental human drives of hunger and thirst, forever unsatisfied. A king and once favored son of Zeus, Tantalus was invited to dine at the table of the gods, an honor beyond measure for any mortal, but he committed a series of unspeakable crimes to repay this divine hospitality. To test the god's omniscience, he murdered his own son, Pelops, chopped him into a stew, and served him to the Olympians to see if they would recognize the horrific ingredients. The gods, of course, knew immediately. Only Demeter, distracted by grief over her lost daughter Persephone, ate a small portion of a shoulder. Appalled and enraged, the gods resurrected Pelops, fashioning a new shoulder for him from ivory, and devised a punishment for Tantalus that would become the very definition of eternal, maddening frustration. His sentence was to stand forever in a pool of fresh, cool water that receded every time he bent his head to drink. Above him hung branches laden with luscious fruits, figs, pomegranates, olives that the wind would blow just out of his grasp whenever he reached for them. He was placed in the underworld, trapped in this cycle of tantalizing proximity and ultimate denial, with the words, "For all time you shall not reach what you see," ringing in his ears. The punishment was a masterpiece of psychological cruelty. It wasn't an absence of sustenance, it was its perpetual, torturous presence. His desire was constantly stimulated and perpetually thwarted, a cycle designed to maximize agony. The myth's very name, Tantalus, gives us the word tantalize, meaning to torment or tease someone with the sight or promise of something that is unobtainable. His story is the ultimate archetype of insatiable desire, a warning that the relentless, unethical pursuit of more power, more wealth, more gratification does not lead to satisfaction, but to a self-made prison of perpetual want. This ancient narrative holds up a dark mirror to our modern consumerist culture, which often feels engineered to keep us in a state of tantalizing dissatisfaction. We are constantly surrounded by a digital pool of water and overhanging fruit. Social media feeds bombard us with images of idealized lives, curated perfection, and must-have new products, making our own reality feel inadequate by comparison. The very engine of advertising is designed to create a need we didn't know we had, to make us feel that happiness and fulfillment are just one purchase away. We scroll through endless options on streaming services, order anything we desire with next-day delivery, and yet often feel a strange emptiness, a sense that the next thing, the newer model, the better vacation will finally be the one that quenches our thirst. This is the modern-day pool of Tantalus, a world of abundance that, for many, only seems to amplify a feeling of lack. We are taught to chase the horizon of desire, never learning to drink from the water we are already standing in. But Tantalus's myth is not just about consumerism. It's a deeper critique of a mindset of entitlement and ethical bankruptcy. His original sin was not merely wanting something. It was the belief that the sacred rules of hospitality, kinship, and life itself did not apply to him. He felt entitled to test the gods, to use his own son as a mere pawn in a game of arrogant one-upmanship. His punishment, therefore, is a perfect metaphor for the spiritual and emotional bankruptcy that accompanies a life lived without integrity or gratitude. He is surrounded by everything he needs, yet he cannot partake because his own past actions, his deceit, his hubris, his violation of the most fundamental bonds have fundamentally corrupted his relationship with the world. He is not being denied sustenance by an external force. He is incapable of receiving it. The water recedes not because of a spell, but because his own nature, shaped by his crimes, makes him unable to truly appreciate and connect with the sustenance before him. This translates powerfully to our own lives. How often do we, in our pursuit of a goal, a promotion, a relationship, a social status, compromise our ethics just a little, telling ourselves the ends justify the means? We might step on a colleague, betray a confidence, or cut a moral corner, believing that achieving the prize will finally bring us the satisfaction we crave. Yet, like Tantalus, we often find that the prize, once grasped, feels hollow. The victory is spoiled because the way we achieved it has poisoned our ability to truly enjoy it. We may have the fruit in our hand, but we find we have no appetite. The myth warns that a life focused solely on acquisition, without a foundation of integrity and gratitude, is a sentence to a different kind of hunger, one that no amount of external success can ever satisfy. The profound lesson of Tantalus, then, is not a call for asceticism or a rejection of desire itself. It is a call for a radical shift in perspective, from grasping to gratitude. The antidote to his eternal frustration is to stop straining for the fruit that is always just out of reach, and to instead look down and appreciate the water we are standing in. It is the practice of contentment, of finding fulfillment not in the endless accumulation of more, but in the deep appreciation of what we already have. This doesn't mean abandoning ambition. It means grounding that ambition in ethical action and a mindful awareness of the present moment. It is the understanding that true wealth isn't about having everything you want, but about wanting everything you have. By breaking the cycle of constant, restless wanting, we step out of Tantalus's pool and into a state of being where the world, in all its simple abundance, becomes truly nourishing. Where the story of Tantalus warns of the torment that comes from desires forever denied, the myth of Dionysus presents a powerful counterpoint, arguing that the deepest agony comes not from denying our desires, but from refusing to acknowledge the wild, untamable parts of our nature at all. Dionysus, the god of wine, ecstasy, ritual madness, and the theater, is one of the most complex and dualistic figures in the Greek pantheon. He is not simply a party god, He is the divine embodiment of everything that exists outside the neat, orderly walls of civilization. The primal life force of the vine that breaks through rock, the intoxicating frenzy of the dance, the liberating loss of self in music, and the terrifying, beautiful chaos of raw, unfiltered emotion. He was often depicted as both man and animal, beautiful and beastly, a bringer of joyous liberation and savage destruction. This inherent duality is the very heart of his myth's warning. To repress these fundamental, chaotic forces within us and within society is not to conquer them, but to invite a far more volatile and destructive explosion. The myths surrounding Dionysus's worship are filled with this theme. He would travel from city to city, followed by a wild procession of Maenads' ecstatic female devotees and satyrs. When a community welcomed him and his rites, they were rewarded with the blessings of the vine, the profound social bonding of the festival, and the psychological release of catharsis, particularly through the transformative power of theater, which was performed in his honor. But when a city or its ruler refused to acknowledge his divinity, attempting to impose a rigid, sterile order that denied the chaotic side of life, the result was always catastrophic. The most famous example is the myth of King Pentheus of Thebes. Pentheus, a stern and authoritarian ruler, saw the Dionysian rites as a threat to public order and morality. He tried to imprison the god and outlaw his worship, insisting on total control and the suppression of all such unruly emotion. In response, Dionysus, disguised, effortlessly lured the king to spy on the Maenads' secret rituals. There, Pentheus's own mother, driven into a divine ecstatic frenzy by the god she had initially denied, mistook her son for a mountain lion and led the women in tearing him limb from limb. The king's rigid refusal to accept the divine, chaotic aspect of reality led directly to his own gruesome dismemberment, a symbolic coming apart at the seams. This violent narrative is a stark allegory for the psychological and societal dangers of repression. Pentheus represents the ego, the part of us that craves absolute control, order, and predictability. He tries to wall off everything that is messy, irrational, emotional, or instinctual. But Dionysus represents the undeniable truth that these elements are not external invaders. They are fundamental components of the human experience. The myth warns that when we, as individuals, try to wall off our grief, our anger, our wilder passions, or our need for abandon, we don't make them disappear. We only force them into the shadows where they gain power and fester, eventually erupting in unhealthy ways as anxiety, depression, addiction, or uncontrollable rage. The psychological concept of catharsis, the process of releasing and thereby providing relief from strong or repressed emotions, finds its origin in Dionysian ritual. The myth argues that we need sanctioned, healthy outlets for our chaos. We need to be able to lose ourselves in music at a concert, to cry unabashedly at a powerful film, to laugh until we cry with friends, to express our creativity without self-judgment. These are our modern Maenad dances. They are not signs of a loss of control, but essential practices for maintaining our mental equilibrium. On a societal level, the myth of Dionysus is a profound warning against cultures of oppressive conformity and intolerance. A society that demands everyone think, act, and feel the same way that suppresses minority views, unconventional art, or alternative ways of living is playing the role of Pentheus. It is building walls that cannot hold. History shows us that such repression inevitably leads to a violent Dionysian eruption, a revolution, a cultural rebellion, a sudden and dramatic overthrow of the established order. The god's following was notably composed of women, slaves, and outsiders, those whose voices were most often suppressed by the rigid, patriarchal order of ancient Greek city-states. His cult offered them a voice, a power, and a community outside of the mainstream, which is why the established powers found it so threatening. This translates directly to modern struggles for social justice and the acceptance of diversity. The myth warns that suppressing the expression of any group, denying the validity of their experience, or enforcing a narrow definition of normal is not a recipe for stability, but for eventual and often chaotic upheaval. True social strength and resilience, the myth suggests, comes from a Dionysian embrace of complexity. It comes from creating a society with enough flexibility and tolerance to allow for a multitude of voices, emotions, and ways of being, thereby granting everyone a healthy share in the rights and preventing the pent-up pressure from ever building to a destructive peak. Where the raw, untamed energy of Dionysus speaks to the forces that leaders must learn to channel rather than suppress, the legend of Theseus offers a masterclass in the application of that very principle, the journey from raw heroism to nuanced statecraft. His story is not a single, monolithic myth, but an entire saga that charts the evolution of a leader, forcing us to ask not just what a hero is, but what a good ruler must become. His most famous feat, of course, is the slaying of the Minotaur, a classic heroic deed that requires immense physical courage and cleverness. But to view that act in isolation is to miss the myth's deeper, more challenging lessons about the moral weight of power. Theseus doesn't just kill the monster, he volunteers as one of the Athenian tributes to be sent into the labyrinth, transforming himself from a prince into a sacrificial lamb to save his people. This initial act sets his entire leadership trajectory. It is founded not on a bid for personal glory, but on a profound sense of responsibility and a willingness to share in the suffering of those he seeks to protect. He doesn't send others into the maze, he leads the way in. This is the foundational ethic of a leader who understands that true authority is earned through shared sacrifice, not seized by birthright or brute force. However, the myth is unflinching in its portrayal of his flaws, and this is where its value as a warning system truly shines. The slaying of the Minotaur is a clear-cut victory of good over evil, but Theseus's journey home is riddled with moral ambiguity and catastrophic error. In his elation and haste to return to Athens, he neglects a crucial promise he made to his father, King Aegeus. They had agreed that if Theseus succeeded, he would change the black sails of mourning on his ship to white sails as a signal of his victory and safe return. Overwhelmed by his triumph and the trauma of the labyrinth, he forgets. His father, seeing the black sails on the horizon, assumes his son is dead and in his grief, throws himself into the sea that now bears his name. This is not a moment of malice but of tragic human oversight. The myth delivers a devastating lesson here. For a leader, the aftermath of a victory can be just as critical as the battle itself. The focus on the immediate crisis, the Minotaur, caused a failure in communication and a neglect of the emotional well-being of those waiting at home. It's a stark warning that a leader's focus must be holistic. They cannot afford to be so fixated on the dragon they are slaying that they forget the people they are sworn to serve. In the modern context, this translates directly to the CEO who is so focused on a quarterly earnings report or a product launch that they become disconnected from the morale and needs of their employees, or the politician who wins an election but fails to transition from campaign mode to the diligent, attentive work of governance. The complexities of Theseus's leadership only deepen as his story progresses. After becoming king of Athens, he is credited with the synoikismos, the political unification of the scattered towns of Attica into a single, powerful city-state. This was a monumental act of visionary state-building, requiring immense political skill, diplomacy, and a compelling vision for a shared future. He is the architect of a more just and cohesive society. Yet the same man later makes a series of terrible personal and political judgments. He abandons Ariadne, the woman whose thread and cleverness were instrumental to his success on the island of Naxos. He impulsively kidnaps the young Helen of Sparta, an act of reckless passion that sows the seeds for future conflict. His later reign is marked by arrogance, and he is eventually overthrown and dies in exile. This is the complete, messy, and profoundly human portrait the myth paints. Theseus is both the heroic unifier and the flawed man whose personal failings ultimately lead to his downfall. The warning is not that leaders must be perfect, but that they must be acutely self-aware. It suggests that the very qualities that make a great crisis leader, decisiveness, boldness, supreme self-confidence, can curdle into the toxic traits that destroy a peacetime ruler: arrogance, impulsivity, and a sense of being above the rules. This nuanced view of power offers indispensable lessons for our modern understanding of leadership in every field. The myth argues that effective leadership is not a single skill, but a dynamic balance of competing virtues. It requires the courage of Theseus, the Minotaur slayer, but also the thoughtful foresight he lacked when he forgot the sails. It demands the visionary capacity to unify people, as he did with Athens, but also the humility to remember that no leader is immune to the corrupting influence of their own power. In the business world, this translates to the founder who must evolve from a disruptive innovator into a responsible CEO, building a culture of ethics and sustainability rather than just chasing growth at any cost. In politics, it is the leader who must balance the need for decisive action with the duty of compassionate governance, understanding that policies have human consequences that ripple far beyond a legislative victory. The legend of Theseus ultimately teaches us that the most labyrinthine challenge a leader will ever face is not a monster in a maze, but the ongoing, daily navigation of their own moral compass, a journey that requires constant course correction between ambition and integrity, between strength and compassion. If the saga of Theseus shows us a leader navigating the complexities of power and morality, the myth of Persephone invites us to look even deeper into the very soil beneath our feet and the hidden chambers of the human heart, to find a warning system not about avoiding darkness, but about learning to live and even grow within it. This is perhaps the most beautiful and cyclical of all the Greek myths, a story that doesn't just explain the changing of the seasons, but offers a profound map for navigating the inevitable winters of our own lives. It begins with Persephone, the radiant daughter of the harvest goddess Demeter, innocently gathering flowers in a sun-drenched meadow. In this moment of perfect, youthful abundance, the earth suddenly splits open. Hades, the stern and silent god of the underworld, emerges from the chasm in his chariot and abducts her, taking her to his shadowy realm to be his queen. The world of light is violently invaded by the world of darkness, and the vibrant, laughing girl is plunged into a reality of shades and silence. Her mother, Demeter, embodies the devastating, world-altering power of grief. In her frantic despair, she abandons her divine duties to search for her daughter. As she mourns, the earth itself mirrors her sorrow. Crops fail, the soil turns hard and cold, trees shed their leaves, and a perpetual winter settles over the land. Life itself grinds to a halt. This part of the myth is a powerful allegory for the experience of profound loss, whether it's the death of a loved one, the end of a relationship, a personal illness, or any shattering event that plunges our personal world into a sudden, barren winter. Demeter's grief is not a private emotion, it is a force of nature that stops the world. The myth validates this experience. It tells us that such deep sorrow is not a sign of weakness, but a natural, powerful response to loss, one that can make the very ground beneath us feel frozen and lifeless. It warns us not to bypass this essential, wintry phase of the process, for it is a necessary and honest reflection of a love that was real. Yet the story does not end in eternal winter. Zeus, seeing the earth dying and humanity facing extinction, intervenes. He commands Hades to release Persephone, but here the myth introduces its crucial, nuanced twist. As she prepares to leave the underworld, Hades offers her a simple pomegranate seed. In the ancient understanding of hospitality and the sacred laws of the cosmos, to partake of food in another's realm is to create an eternal bond with it. Persephone, perhaps out of curiosity, pity, or a newfound understanding, eats a few of the seeds. This single, small act changes everything. It means she cannot fully return to the world of light. She is now forever connected to the world of darkness. A compromise is struck. For each seed she ate, she must spend a corresponding number of months each year as queen of the underworld. For the rest of the year, she may return to her mother and the world above. This is the genius of the myth. Persephone is not merely a victim who is rescued. Through her choice, however unknowing, she becomes a person who has integrated her experience. She is no longer just the innocent maiden core. She is now also Persephone, the powerful queen of the dead, who understands both the sunlight and the shadows. Her annual descent is not a punishment, but a fulfillment of her destiny. When she is with Hades, Demeter grieves, and we have autumn and winter. When she returns, Demeter's joy makes the earth bloom again, giving us spring and summer. The myth explains the seasonal cycle, but its true power is as a psychological and spiritual blueprint for resilience. It teaches us that our periods of darkness are not aberrations to be rushed through or avoided. They are an essential, cyclical part of our wholeness. We are meant to have winters. This ancient story offers a vital warning against the modern cult of perpetual summer, the pressure to always be happy, productive, and optimistic. The myth tells us that this is a denial of half of life's experience. To never allow ourselves to grieve, to rest, to turn inward, is to live like a world in endless, scorching summer, which would eventually become its own kind of barren wasteland. The dark, fallow periods, the times of sadness, introspection, and even depression are not signs of failure. They are our own personal underworld, where essential work is being done. It is in the darkness that seeds germinate. It is in the quiet of winter that the soil regenerates. Persephone's story assures us that it is not only okay to descend into these phases, but necessary for our renewal. We are meant to emerge from them changed, having gathered a new kind of wisdom and strength that can only be forged in the depths. Her dual role as both the goddess of spring's rebirth and the queen of the underworld makes her the ultimate symbol of hope, but not a naive one. It is a hope that has stared into the abyss and incorporated it. This is profoundly relevant to our understanding of environmental cycles as well. In an era of climate crisis, we are learning, too late, the dire cost of ignoring the natural cycles of rest and renewal in ecosystems. We push for endless growth and extraction, refusing to allow the land its necessary fallow periods, and we are now witnessing the consequences. Persephone's myth warns us that we violate these natural rhythms at our peril, whether within our own souls or in the world around us. Her annual return is a promise that winter is always followed by spring, but it is a promise contingent on our acceptance of the entire cycle, not just the part we find comfortable. She teaches us that true resilience isn't about avoiding the fall, but about trusting in the rise that always, inevitably, follows. From the deep, regenerative cycles of Persephone's descent and return, we now turn our gaze to a creature of pure, transformative fire, a symbol that takes the concept of cyclical renewal and pushes it to its most spectacular and absolute extreme. Across countless cultures, from ancient Egypt and Greece to Chinese and Arabic traditions, we find variations of a magnificent, singular bird, the phoenix. This legendary being lives for centuries, and when the time comes for its life to end, it does not simply die. It builds its own funeral pyre, a nest of the most fragrant spices and sacred woods, and then, with a single beat of its wings or a ray of the sun, it ignites itself. It is consumed utterly by a blazing inferno, reduced to nothing but a pile of ashes. But from those very ashes, a new, young phoenix emerges, reborn, radiant, and ready to begin its life cycle anew. It is the ultimate metaphor for resurrection, but to see it only as a symbol of coming back to life is to miss its profound power as a warning system. The phoenix does not just die and return, it actively, voluntarily participates in its own destruction to make way for its rebirth. It teaches us that there are times when holding on to what is the old, the worn, the outdated structures is a far greater danger than embracing the cleansing, albeit terrifying, power of the flame. This myth is a direct and potent antidote to the paralysis of fatalism, the belief that a disaster is an endpoint, a final verdict from which there is no return. The phoenix stares into the heart of the inferno and sees not an end but a necessary beginning. Its entire existence is a cyclical rejection of the notion that any catastrophe, no matter how total, is permanent. This is a crucial warning for both individuals and societies prone to collapse in the face of overwhelming failure or loss. On a personal level, it speaks to anyone who has experienced a bankruptcy, a devastating career setback, the end of a long marriage, or a health crisis that shatters their former identity. The instinct is often to see this as the conclusion of their story. The phoenix argues the opposite. It suggests that such an event, while painful beyond measure, can be the very catalyst that burns away the limitations, the compromises, and the tired patterns of the old life, creating a clean slate from which a stronger, wiser, and more authentic self can emerge. The old you had to die for the new you to be born. This isn't about minimizing the pain of the fire. It's about finding the courage to believe that there is something waiting for you in the ashes that would have been impossible without it. We can see this phoenix principle operating throughout the grand sweep of human history, where periods of immense destruction have often cleared the ground for breathtaking leaps forward. The Black Death in 14th century Europe was an unimaginable humanitarian catastrophe, wiping out a third of the continent's population. The social and economic order, which had seemed immovable, was reduced to ashes. Yet, from this devastation arose the Renaissance, a rebirth of art, science, and humanism that fundamentally reshaped the world. The old feudal system, weakened by the plague, could not hold, and the fire of the pandemic, horrifying as it was, created the conditions for a new world to rise. Similarly, the utter destruction of World War II left entire cities in rubble and millions displaced. But from those ashes emerged the United Nations, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and a new framework for international cooperation designed to prevent such a conflict from ever happening again. The old order of rampant nationalism and imperialism had to burn before a new commitment to global peace and security could take flight. These are not just historical footnotes, they are monumental testaments to the Phoenix cycle, reminding us that societal collapse, while terrifying, can also be the necessary precursor to a more just and innovative society. In our modern world, this myth offers a powerful lens through which to view the often painful process of innovation and progress. Industries are constantly being consumed by their own phoenix fires. The music industry's traditional model, built on physical albums and record stores, was effectively reduced to ashes by the digital revolution and the rise of file sharing. For a time, it seemed like the industry itself might die, but from those ashes rose entirely new ecosystems of streaming, digital distribution, and artist-led platforms that, while not perfect, have created global access to music in ways previously unimaginable. The old system had to die for the new one to be born. The same pattern is unfolding today with the automotive industry's painful but necessary transition from internal combustion engines to electric vehicles. The fossil fuel-based model is being intentionally set aflame by climate necessity and technological advancement, and while the transition is fraught with economic displacement and uncertainty, it is paving the way for a more sustainable transportation system. The phoenix myth warns us against clinging too tightly to the familiar nest simply because it is what we know. It encourages us to see the value in letting old, unsustainable systems burn so that something more adaptive and resilient can take their place. Ultimately, the phoenix is more than a symbol of hope. It is a symbol of radical agency. Its fire is not a random act of God or a lightning strike from the sky. The bird builds its own pyre. It chooses the spices and the woods. It initiates the combustion. This is the most vital part of the warning. Renewal is not a passive process where we simply wait for time to heal all wounds. It is an active, courageous, and deliberate act of letting go. It is the entrepreneur who, after a failed venture, consciously analyzes what went wrong, gathers the valuable lessons like fragrant spices, and uses that knowledge to build the foundation for their next, more successful endeavor. It is the community that, after a natural disaster, doesn't just rebuild the same vulnerable structures, but seizes the opportunity to create a more disaster-resilient and equitable town. The phoenix does not fear the fire. It understands that the fire is the source of its eternal life. This magnificent myth closes our journey through these 26 warning systems by offering the most empowering message of all, that within each ending lies the seed of a beginning, and that sometimes the most courageous thing we can do is to light the match ourselves. Individually, these 26 myths are powerful stories, but when we step back to view them as a whole, something far more remarkable comes into focus. They are not isolated tales from forgotten cultures. They are interconnected nodes in a vast, ancient network, a unified warning system designed to diagnose the recurring ailments of the human condition. This is not a random collection of fables, but a carefully woven tapestry of wisdom, where each thread supports and reinforces the others, creating a holistic guide for navigating life's greatest challenges. Think of it as a grand, mythological operating system for civilization, with each story functioning as a unique piece of code designed to patch a specific vulnerability in our shared software, whether that bug is arrogance, short-sightedness, conformity, or greed. This interconnectedness becomes brilliantly clear when we see how these myths converse with each other across the centuries. The caution of Icarus, flying too close to the sun, finds its necessary counterpart in the ingenuity of Daedalus, who understood the parameters of flight but also its perils. One warns of the human flaw, while the other instructs on the responsible application of innovation. Similarly, the tragedy of King Midas, who valued gold above all else, is perfectly balanced by the ordeal of Sisyphus, who had all the effort but none of the meaning. One shows the poverty of having everything you want but nothing you need, while the other shows the agony of wanting something you can never have. Together, they form a complete lesson on the nature of value and fulfillment that neither could achieve alone. Even the solitary narcissism of Narcissus, staring into his pool, is answered by the collaborative triumph of the Argonauts, who achieved the impossible only by trusting in each other's diverse talents. The myths don't just present problems, they offer complementary solutions, creating a dynamic and balanced curriculum for ethical living. This grand synthesis reveals that our ancestors were mapping the psychological and societal landscape with stunning sophistication. They identified recurring patterns, what we might now call archetypes, and crafted stories to help us recognize them in ourselves. The pattern of hubris appears in Icarus, in Phaethon, and in Arachne. The pattern of ignored wisdom is central to Cassandra and echoed in the forgetfulness of Theseus. The pattern of destructive curiosity is the core of Pandora's myth, but is also present in the reckless ambition of those who would build a tower to the heavens. By seeing these patterns repeat across different stories, we are better equipped to spot them in our own lives, in our leaders, and in our cultural moments. It's as if they gave us a diagnostic toolkit where each myth is a specific lens for examining a particular type of problem. Ultimately, This collective wisdom system provides a robust framework for modern decision-making, one that is far more nuanced than a simple list of rules. It doesn't just say, "Don't be arrogant." It shows us the many faces of arrogance through Icarus, Phaethon, and Prometheus. It doesn't just say, "Be innovative." It contrasts the responsible stewardship of Prometheus and Daedalus with the catastrophic overreach of Pandora. This framework encourages us to approach complex issues from multiple angles, understanding that a challenge like climate change isn't just one problem but a web of them. It requires the humility of Icarus to respect planetary boundaries, the foresight of Cassandra to heed scientific warnings, the collaborative spirit of the Argonauts for global cooperation, and the transformative hope of Phoenix to believe in renewal after sacrifice. By understanding the deep unity of mythology, we unlock a profound resource for navigating the complexity of the modern world, realizing that these ancient voices are not speaking of a distant past, but are in constant, urgent conversation about our present and our future. But how do we move these ancient stories from the realm of fascinating theory into the tangible world of daily practice? The true power of these 26 myths is not just in their telling, but in their application. They are a toolkit for navigating the complexities of modern life, offering a timeless lens through which to examine our most pressing personal and professional dilemmas. Let's begin with the corporate world, a stage where these archetypal patterns play out with dramatic regularity. Imagine a boardroom considering a risky, rapid expansion plan. A leader versed in these stories might invoke the myth of Icarus, cautioning the team against flying too close to sun of unchecked growth without considering the melting point of their operational wax. This isn't just a poetic metaphor, it's a powerful framework for a risk assessment meeting, forcing a conversation about sustainable limits that a standard profit and loss statement might ignore. Similarly, a company facing a public relations crisis could learn from the tragedy of Cassandra. If internal whistleblowers or market analysts have been issuing ignored warnings for months, the situation calls for more than damage control. It demands a fundamental shift in culture, one that values dissenting voices and heeds early alarms to prevent a full-blown Trojan horse scenario from devastating the organization. This mythological wisdom can be woven directly into the fabric of leadership training and organizational policy. A corporate ethics code inspired by King Midas wouldn't just warn against corruption. It would actively champion policies that measure success beyond the bottom line, valuing employee well-being, environmental sustainability, and community impact as forms of true wealth, thus avoiding the spiritual emptiness of a golden touch. For team dynamics, the saga of the Argonauts provides a masterclass in project management. Assembling a team for a critical initiative wouldn't just be about finding the most skilled individuals, but about curating a diverse crew of specialists, the creative visionary, the meticulous analyst, the empathetic communicator, and most importantly, fostering a deep sense of trust and shared purpose, understanding that the complex challenges of today require collaborative genius, not solitary. Heroics, even the myth of Sisyphus has a place in human resources, urging managers to design roles that offer autonomy, mastery, and purpose, ensuring employees are pushing meaningful boulders up a hill, not just repeating futile tasks that roll back down each night, crushing morale and innovation. On a community level, these stories offer a shared language for tackling collective challenges. A town planning committee debating a new development that threatens a local forest could frame the discussion around the tale of Pandora's box, thoughtfully weighing the benefits of progress against the potential for unleashing unforeseen environmental and social consequences that cannot be put back. The myth of the Minotaur provides a powerful analogy for a community confronting a dark chapter in its own history, such as a legacy of racial injustice. It teaches that the monster in the labyrinth cannot be appeased by annual sacrifices. It must be confronted head-on with courage and truth, using the thread of historical acknowledgement to navigate the confusing maze of the past and emerge into the light of reconciliation. Community organizing itself can draw inspiration from the Argonauts, building coalitions where different groups, from local businesses to grassroots activists, each contribute their unique skills to achieve a common goal, like revitalizing a public park or creating a local food bank, proving that the golden fleece of a stronger community can only be won together. For our personal lives, these myths become a mirror for self-reflection and a guide for growth. The story of Narcissus is a potent warning in the age of social media, reminding us to look up from the curated reflection of our screens and engage in the authentic, messy world of real connection, valuing empathy over likes. When facing a difficult personal failure, the narrative of the Phoenix offers a transformative perspective, encouraging us to see the experience not as a final defeat, but as a necessary fire that clears the ground for a stronger, wiser self to rise from the ashes. The lesson of Orpheus teaches the value of patience and trust in our relationships and long-term goals, warning us that a moment of doubt or a need for premature reassurance can undermine years of effort right at the brink of success. And in our daily choices, the caution of King Midas asks us to regularly audit our priorities, ensuring we are not turning the people and experiences that truly matter into mere golden statues impressive to display, but cold to the touch and devoid of life. By integrating these ancient patterns into our modern thinking, we don't just learn about mythology, we equip ourselves with a living, breathing wisdom system, one that has been field-tested for millennia and remains fiercely relevant for the choices we face today. Throughout this exploration, we've journeyed across millennia and cultures, uncovering how 26 ancient myths form a profound and interconnected warning system for humanity. These stories are far more than relics of a superstitious past. They are a timeless dialogue about the recurring patterns of human nature, our hubris, our fear, our short-sightedness, and our incredible capacity for both destruction and renewal. The most striking realization is how these narratives speak with one voice across the ages, reminding us that the core challenges we face are not new. The same thirst for unchecked power that toppled Icarus from the sky fuels the recklessness that pushes our planet to the brink. The same willful deafness that doomed Cassandra's Troy allows us to ignore the scientific warnings of our own time. The myths tell us again and again that we are not the first to stand at these crossroads, and the paths to disaster are already well marked by those who came before us. This shared wisdom offers us a priceless advantage, the chance to learn from the mistakes of our ancestors without having to personally live through the catastrophes. By heeding these encoded messages, we can short-circuit the cycle of error and avoid repeating the gravest errors of history. The call to humility from Icarus and Phaethon can guide our approach to artificial intelligence and genetic engineering, urging caution and ethical foresight. The lesson of collective effort from the Argonauts can shape our response to global crises, showing that only through trust and collaboration can we secure our shared future. The promise of the Phoenix gives us the courage to let unsustainable systems and outdated paradigms fall away, trusting in our ability to rise from the ashes with something stronger and more resilient. These stories provide a moral and psychological toolkit, equipping us with the perspective needed to navigate an increasingly complex world with wisdom rather than just reacting with fear. Ultimately, this journey through mythology is an invitation to reflection and action. It asks you to look inward and consider which of these ancient patterns might be playing out in your own life. Are you, like King Midas, prioritizing the wrong kind of wealth? Are you, like Sisyphus, feeling trapped in a cycle of meaningless effort? Or are you, like Prometheus, striving to bring a transformative gift to the world, yet mindful of the responsibility it carries? Let these stories inspire you to share this deeper understanding with others, to foster conversations that are rooted in this ancient wisdom, and to help build a world that is not just technologically advanced, but also emotionally intelligent and ethically grounded. The greatest tribute we can pay to these timeless tales is to ensure they are not merely heard, but actively lived, transforming their cautionary lessons into a blueprint for a wiser, more compassionate, and more resilient future for all.